hear you. It's good to see you.
So, if people could, if you haven't done so, please review the agenda and the minutes, and I'll be asking for a motion.
Okay, we'll do it. I just wanted to make sure all our folks are fine.
Just to let you know, I know that of all the offices, you're the only office that doesn't sweat this one.
All right, so I hear a motion to adopt the agenda and the minutes?
Yes.
And I hear a second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? The ayes have it. Okay. We are starting with the presentation and on the budget, and then we will have the public hearing, and members of the public can testify. Many of you have signed in. If you didn't sign in, please state your name before you give your testimony, but it would be great if you could sign in the back, and I will turn it over to the Director of Budget, Vanessa Diaz-Lopez.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for being here. We're going to do a very short presentation on the preliminary budget. As you know, we're doing a preliminary budget hearing today. It's during your regular meeting. The intention is to be able to get some feedback from the general public and from the chairs on priorities, what you see should be priorities in the budget. Hello, OMB is in the house. Councilmember Kalis is in the house, and I don't know all the community board chairs. My apologies.
Where are the table tents?
And all of you who are here, thank you for being here all together.
So missing being redone, sorry.
Let's see. Wait, no. Is this the correct one? Yes.
It's moving, yeah.
Thank you. So, okay. So the preliminary budget, excuse me, before I start, I just want to say the budget team is here. So Nelson, wherever you're at, raise your hand. James is back there, and then Riley, who is our intern for the budget unit. So at the end, you'll get all of our information, and you know how to contact us if you have any further questions. The preliminary budget was announced, I think, about 2 weeks ago. It's $92.2 billion, and it's an increase of $3.05 billion from last year's fiscal year 19 adopted budget. And the growth for that, it's because of labor agreements to the UFT, DC 37, and Teamster unions. It's also, well, I'm not used to this thing. It's also related to a commitment to add an additional 1,900 seats for 3K for all. Those are going to the Bronx and Brooklyn. It's also related to special education and funded mandates, and then mandatory charter costs, charter school costs. Okay. I think everyone knows by now that there are a number of issues and deficits that are being projected by both the state and the city, mainly related to tax policy changes, which has impacted the amount of money and revenue that is going to be coming in from the personal income tax. And so it's also related to what's happening at the federal level with the government shutdown, and Lord knows whatever shutdowns could continue to happen moving forward, hopefully none. So the state announced $2.3 billion in shortfalls, and it's proposing $600 million in cuts. Those cuts are mainly around education, financial assistance for families in need, TANF, that program, health services for at-risk youth out of foster care. The city is also projecting a deficit and we're not getting as much revenue as we originally intended from the personal income tax, at a rate of $935 million. So the city then, the mayor, has decided to institute a PEG, a program to eliminate the gap. And it calls for all city agencies to find, as a whole, by April 2019, some savings of $750 million So all city agencies are go back and look at, what are they using money for that they don't need. For example, one of the things that the mayor is asking is that the Department of Education looks at consultants that they're using, which amounts to $25 million. And so they're asking to look at some of these monies that are being used and whether they can be cut or covered in any other ways. Are there programs, expenses that can be scaled back or eliminated for now? And there's also a partial hiring freeze, and that's just going to be expanded. So they're not going to be hiring new people for some time, So that's sort of like the most immediate way of addressing this. And so if city agencies do not propose something that is satisfactory by April 2019, then the mayor's office will be making decisions. I'm sorry that this is kind of small. We do have this and can email it to you if you want it. Most of this information is it's what's available in the OMB website. We just grab little pieces here and there and put it here. So the fiscal year, the proposed fiscal year, the preliminary budget, it's continues a commitment towards health insurance for the uninsured, so we like that. The fair fares for low-income New Yorkers, which the City Council fought for last year, so there's a commitment there for that. It adds $3K for all seats, which we feel is important. And it continues a commitment for the crisis intervention training study at NYPD. That's the training for how to address people with mental health illnesses. And also this includes school officers. I forget their actual name, but the police, excuse me?
School resource officers.
Right, the officers that receive you, the NYPD officers that receive you when you go to the school, how to address the students and people who come in a less hostile way, basically. Yes?
Yeah. So is it just to maintain that the crisis intervention training at NYPD just to maintain what it is, or is there?
It expands it actually. It maintains and expands it by a little, like 100. I don't know the exact amount. I can look for that and give it to you later, but it expands it somewhat.
And I don't know how many people in the room know about this, but I mean, it's kind of hidden. It's a hidden secret. It seems to be, and I think it needs to be like much more publicized. So I don't know if in expanding that will cover that aspect of being more publicized.
Okay, we can look into that and get more information. And then the 10-year capital plan. I just picked a few things, right? It continues some commitment towards housing. It has over 10 years, over 10 years, $3 billion to address the NYCHA building system. So anything from the roof, elevator replacements, asbestos removal, lead abatement, pest mitigations, and the whole issue with all these heating systems that are taking place. So there's $3 billion there. How I don't know what's going to happen with all the different, HUD and federal government might take over and that sort of thing, but this is what's in the 10-year capital plan at this point without any other, anything else happening at this time. There's $3 billion for new units, affordable units, and these are for low, moderate, and middle income New Yorkers. And then there's another $2.4 billion for the construction and preservation of housing, which I think a lot of the council and also the borough president has spoken over a number of years about the importance of ensuring that we can also preserve housing, right? So there's $2.5 billion there, and that is specific to seniors, persons with disabilities, and the formerly homeless households. There's $580 million for the rehabilitation and disposition of city-owned housing units. There should be a little bit more detail paid to this, quite frankly. We need to read a little bit more about how this would be happening. But in essence, is all of these properties that are really have been under the city for many years that are falling apart. And so there should be some attention paid to exactly how they're going to be rehabilitating this property, how they're going to be disposing of this property. What does disposing actually mean? Whether it's actually just going to be maybe rehabilitated and then handed over to people to continue to do leases, lease those facilities for affordable housing and so on. So there's a little tiny more detail in the documents for OMB about this, but certainly this is something to pay attention to as we move forward the next 10 years.
Good opportunity to turn them into HDFCs.
Right. So, and that is some of what they want to do. So there's a combination among all the different programs that HPD has. Some would be towards actually leasing, some will be towards home ownership. But again, there needs to be some attention paid to how that happens. How do you choose the developers? Do you sell? And is it really for home ownership or just, that sort of thing is something that we need to be paid attention as we move forward. There's $2.416 million that are going to be to demolish unsafe buildings, and to develop urban renewal areas. So again, what buildings are unsafe? How do you deem them unsafe? How do you choose which ones are going to be demolished, and what are you going to do with that space moving forward? Those are some of the things to be looking for as we progress in the 10 years. In education, there's $3.6 million towards maintaining the school buildings and created an additional 57 school seats. This is across the 5 boroughs. There is in the capital plan, the SCA capital plan, it breaks down what the intention is on how many seats per borough are intended to happen. And as you may know, those are amended every 5 years. The capital plan is a 15-year capital plan, and it's amended every 5 years. So if you want to know a little bit more about where the projections are for school seats, you can look there. The Department of Correction there is a commitment to $765.6 million for the design and construction of new jail facilities. I'll bring attention to this figure because this office has been working on the task force for Rikers Island, and clearly $765.6 million is not enough money over 10 years to be able to build the facilities that would need to be built in order to, eliminate Rikers Island. So this is something that we will be bringing attention to. The administration has basically said we don't know what the cost is going to be yet. So we are kind of like putting a placeholder for that. And then there is some commitment to continue to add the monies as they know what it would be. And I think in the count, one of the things we want to pay attention to is if in fact this happens. I think I've heard some commitment from the council, certainly Councilman Powers, to continue to look at this throughout the preliminary budget hearings, whether this figure would change or not because of the Rikers Island push closing. Resiliency and climate mitigation, there's $19.7 million to design capital projects, and basically there is a push to look at how our government buildings are functioning. What kind of changes do we need to do to look at gas emissions? How do we address energy efficiency? But also what's happening in the coast, the coastal protection, and what green infrastructures can we do to mitigate rainfall? There is some concern, however, on Beast End on what capacity do we actually have as a city to actually design and construct some of these mitigations, and they're trying to figure out what is it that we can actually do within the size and constraints of what the capital plan allows us to do. So the mayor has spoken highly of Lorraine Grillo in terms of how she has addressed the SCA, or ran the SCA for many years, and how she has been able to move things forward and kind of is looking at how to use some of her approaches at the different city agencies across the board to address capital projects. We have to find out a little bit more as we move forward what that actually means. And then lastly, of important to us, or to everybody in the city of New York, transportation. There's been a lot of call for people for the city to add SPS buses to address infrastructure, lighting, switches, and so on. Our experts here for community boards who do transportation can speak a lot more than me on this. And Paul is not in the room, but $14.1 billion for system-wide infrastructure upgrades. So lights and just being able to do ADA access to different facilities or even ramps and so on in the sidewalks and that sort of stuff. For $428.6 million for track improvement. So we're giving the MTA, right? So $428.6 million we're contributing, I shouldn't say giving, for track improvement and other projects. So when other projects is kind of like SPS buses, lanes, and that sort of stuff. There is $1.5 billion to purchase 466 new subway cars, and again, over 10 years. And $1.1 billion to purchase 1,400 new buses. So this information that I provided here, you can find yourself and read a little bit more detail on it, or a lot more detail, whichever you prefer. And these are the websites where you can find it. All of this is in the Office of Management and Budget website. So there is a general link, and then a summary of the financial plan can be found over this link. And the 10-year capital plan is in this link. And all the hard work that the community boards do throughout the year to represent your priorities and so on is also available there via the community board register. It's by Borough. Thank you very much for putting that together, OMB. I mean, you, community boards and OMB for summarizing it. And then it is also by geographic report. And then lastly, I'd like to just say today we're not having a hearing. We want to hear from you, and general public that wants to speak, but also the community boards on what you think the priorities should be. And in addition to that, we have a survey, I should say, to be able to collect priorities from people in Manhattan who live in Manhattan. And so this is the link that we're using. We're asking you to please share it widely, maybe via your websites, for community boards, or just your personal Twitter handles and so on. And you can also submit written testimony at this email address, which is the budget unit's email address. Are there any questions before we move to testimonies? Yeah.
And can you just go back to just to talk about more about the PEG?
Yes.
Is there any sort of risk? My first thought was that programs that could be cut would be like the summer youth employment program or some of those programs that weren't even included in last year's budget, and we had to fight to get back in. So can you talk about how the risk that those programs would be to be cut again for something like this?
There is very preliminary conversation around that. The mayor has not specifically said cut this, cut that, but there is a risk that summer youth employment program would be cut. I don't think it has been made public yet. It's kind of like conversations that are taking place around with the council members in the briefing and in our office when we were in the briefing.
The budget dance is still after.
Right.
Councilmember Kalo, I'm sure the budget dance is still alive and well.
Right. So
it'll go back. Don't worry about it.
Right.
On the steps, same steps you've been on for how many years?
Right. So there is a commitment to maintain it. So, but yes.
So, community boards' budgets have already been cut by some $46,000.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's getting back to the PEG. How much more should we then decide that we're going to cut? Because
I'm not sure the community boards are being asked to cut their budgets, but I can get back to you.
Could we find out for sure? Because I think that's of keen interest of almost everyone in this
Absolutely.
room.
We can find out and get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Sorry, one more question. In terms of the 10 years of $3 billion to address NYCHA, is that sufficient? Is that enough to actually, no?
No.
Okay.
It's not sufficient.
Just a quick question. In reference to the addressing climate change, is that funding going to be across different agencies? Because there's no climate agency, right? So is that across agencies?
Yes. Yes, and I can get you more detail on that
Yeah,
as well. I'll make sure to make a note. Anyone else? So at this point, we're moving to anyone in the general public who wants to speak?
Is anybody who signed in is here who wants to testify or speak on the budget? So I think probably go to the front of the room. Here, start saying your name.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Sophie Winfield-Poost, and I live in East Harlem. I'm currently attending Columbia Secondary School for Math, Science, and Engineering. It's easy to forget when it doesn't affect you. It's even easier to ignore it completely, as it's not a problem for you. However, air and environmental pollution are huge problems that induce climate change, which affects us all. Where I live, in January of 2018, it was reported that East Harlem continues to have the highest hospitalization rate for asthma out of all of the neighborhoods in New York City. 1 out of 4 low-income children are influenced by asthmatic side effects almost every day. The children in my neighborhood are affected by secondhand smoke, unhealthy living conditions, and major roadways, which pollute the air heavily in correspondence to not having enough green spaces to contradict the power of pollution. Nevertheless, the air quality and pollution side effects have improved greatly and continue to improve for the entire city. But still, there are areas like my own where the struggle is still ongoing and people who have asthma still have to be treated. Particulate matter and ozone pollution still have an effect on East Harlem despite all the progress which has been made. Although conditions still need to be improved, throughout East Harlem, the spread of organizations that can help with asthmatic side effects, attacks, and checkups is increasing steadily. To continue to receive these positive outcomes, these programs need to be funded. Organizations such as the East Harlem Asthma Center of Excellence, the East Harlem Walk-In Asthma Center, and the East Harlem Neighborhood Health Action Center are helping our community prosper and need to continuously have the funds to pursue their path. Additionally, funding needs to go to organizations who are helping incorporate more environmentally friendly practices, which make asthmatic patients live and breathe easier, along with reversing some of the air pollution that caused these problems in the first place. For example, the nonprofits We Act and Solar One have and are executing an initiative to make different types of housing energy independent by their Project Sun that puts solar panels on buildings to create jobs and lower residents' energy bill significantly. Not only this, but it is a way to incorporate clean energy into these buildings' lifestyle and reduce pollution for many people. Recently, they have planned to put solar panels in East Harlem on the Carver houses, a development which after doing this will really impact our neighborhood positively. As our neighborhood has been improving positively in many different ways, but as air pollution, air quality worsens, we need to continue taking measures to protect asthmatic people in East Harlem and try to solve some of the hard-hitting issues that affect some of us every day. Thank you for your time.
So my question is, on community boards, you can be 16 or 17. Are you eligible to be on a community board?
No,
So when will you be eligible to be on a community board?
in 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm impressed. Congratulations.
I don't know, Madam Borough President, there's always an exception to policy. I think this would be it.
You did a lot of research. I think it's excellent research. Does your school have
Anyone else who would like to make a statement? Yes. Yes, please, come on up. Please identify yourself for the record.
Good morning, Marie Winfield. I'm an East Harlem resident and the mom. I'm
Proud mom.
not prepared as my daughter, but I'm here to talk this morning about the 10-year capital plan and to talk trash. I am very concerned about the 10-year capital plan, which Department of Sanitation has about $1.3 billion over the next 10 years for funding for garages, construction and reconstruction of garages. M11 East Harlem has a community, DSNY has committed to a community advisory group out of the East Harlem rezoning points of agreement to talk about the facilitation of an enclosed consolidated garage for M11 and M10 facilities, which currently reside entirely in M11's district. This is a long-standing issue with trash trucks on the street, environmental impacts that the community has seen for years at 99th Street, and this is now being moved to the Potamkin Garage auto mall site, which is a failed economic development project that the city has put lots of money into. I'm here to ask for today for the borough president's support, the borough board's support, to make sure that the borough budget response for every single year that it needs to be there to ask for funding for an enclosed consolidated garage that meets the needs of Northern Manhattan. There is no comprehensive plan for sanitation services in Northern Manhattan. We've had 2 uptown rezonings. We have estimated EIS that increases in East Harlem alone from 50 tons a week to over 123 tons a week with the projected development sites. This is an issue that we can't keep kicking down the road, and we really need, this should have been something that was solved during the East Harlem rezoning as a condition of the rezoning, and it wasn't addressed through the rezoning. And the community has spoken up through the East Harlem Neighborhood Plan. It was voted as a priority. This has been a Community Board 11 budget priority, and in the Statement of District Needs for years. So I implore you, as this is something that affects all of Northern Manhattan, half the borough, we need a comprehensive plan and we need funding to make this happen. We just need the political will. It is an environmental justice issue where we have Spring Street, a consolidated garage that costs millions and millions of dollars, and state-of-the-art facilities, and uptown for sanitation workers, for residents, for children, for schools, for all the residents that have been living through this nightmare for years. I do implore you to please consider this as part of the borough budget response. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Anyone else would like to come on up? Thank you.
Hello. Today I'm
Please state your name for you.
I'm going to, but I'm stating that I'm speaking for myself because I'm also part of a not-for-profit, but I'm a resident in Manhattan, so I'm Alexander Adams. And my comment is more on the broad sense, which is kind of what we're seeing today. But just looking at a couple examples that were up here. For instance, it was up here talking about 1,900 seats for 3K. This is an example where we've pushed a program and we haven't even finished 4K, okay? So we're already pushing 3K and we haven't even pushed all of schools to have 4K. So how can we kind of like get ahead of ourselves? And then the mayor goes around and says it's pre-K for everyone. Well, it's not. It's only pre-K for certain neighborhoods in certain boroughs in certain areas. That's the truth. It's not pre-K for everyone. And this is an example of where we get ahead of ourselves and we get down to the minutia and we make deals, whether it's through rezonings or whatever, and we say, we'll help you for one area or for one item. We'll help you for drug rehab, for pre-K, for whatever. But we're not looking at the broad sense. When you look up here and it says we're going to cut education, again, we're cutting education and we're adding another education program. I mean, how can you logically cut the basics and then add additional areas? I mean, it makes no sense to me. The same thing is happening with other groups. NYCHA. The question came up, will this fund what you need for NYCHA? No. Well, then why are we even budgeting? I mean, if you're not going to express and fix the problem, then you might as well just throw spaghetti against the wall and say, well, we gave them a bone. We threw a bone to them. 50 million, 50 billion, whatever. Transit. It's insufficient. Now we can talk about it's the state, the city, it's whoever. Guess what? It's people. You know, it goes back to Democrat, Republic. It's people. We all live here. We all pay taxes. We need to get to work. We need to get there on time. What is it going to take? You know, we have to get these things right. And then the other one I would say is lead in schools. Lead in schools is a big issue, but of course we're cutting funding for schools, so how are we going to get to lead if we don't even have classrooms? If we don't have heat in NYCHA, how are we ever going to fix NYCHA? If we don't have heat in the jails, then how are we ever going to fix the jails? These are just examples of how we're going after small little pieces and we're missing the big picture. We're not even funding the basics. You know, some ideas that I've given to some people in the past, even if this mayor doesn't want to support MTA, fine. I kind of wouldn't give them a lot more money because they don't spend money well. But, you know, you could, for instance, add additional lighting around the entrances to subway stations, which is a safety factor. You could add additional police cameras around those entrances. You could do other things that would help for commuters, but may not be specifically for MTA. We talk about MTA trying to add elevators and ADA accessibility, but the curbs right outside the entrances are not ADA accessible or have excessive ramps and those sorts of things. So if we're going to talk about one side of the equation, we have to talk about the other side of the equation, and they have to work together. And so these are some examples. I've talked also about business improvement districts. They help all kinds of things above ground. Why couldn't they help below ground? Why couldn't they help with security, cleaning, whatever? It's their people, it's their customers that are coming in the subways to visit the shops. So I think these are the types of issues we need to think about. It does mean that when we fund, let's say, education 100%, yes, I said I'm part of a not-for-profit. It may mean that there are cuts for very small programs, whether it be not-for-profits, whether it be wherever it be, whether it's drug rehab, homelessness, whatever. But the fact is, if you fund education, you fund these things, you will fix those other problems later on. And the last thing I would say that always gets overlooked is municipal buildings. And we have a lot of municipal employees, but you can't expect the police to do a good job when their building is from 1950 and they're in cubicles crammed in there like sardines. You can't expect the fire department to get to a fire when their firehouse doesn't even fit their fire engine anymore. I mean, it's just insanity. So think of these broader ideas when you're thinking of the budget.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Okay, just to reiterate, written testimony will be accepted and you can submit it at budget@manhattanbp.nyc.gov. Vanessa, is there anything else you would like to say before?
You can also send us questions if you have any questions at this particular email. We are looking for your responses to the budget survey by March 8th, and we'll be submitting a Borough President response in March. So, no, there's nothing else I'd like to say at this point, except community boards to be able to give their feedback.
Okay. Thank you very much. What I will do right now, though, is I will go to council members' report. Councilmember Ben Kalos is here, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for all of you who are doing so much great work, and to CB11, which really showed up for the budget hearing, and for also volunteering at CB11 meetings. So I'm Councilmember Ben Kalos. I have the privilege of representing East Harlem, the Upper East Side, East Midtown, and Roosevelt Island, CBs 11, 8, and 6. I wanted to talk about two issues versus usually my longer reports that Gail always asks me to shorten. The first one is campaign finance. In November, 1.1 million voters, more people than voted for mayor on the Democrat or Republican line, said we needed campaign finance reform, created a new system where candidates could get 75% of their money from the city and get an 8-to-1 match. I thought that was a mandate. I authored the law that said this should apply to the public advocates race. And I think almost every single candidate has opted into this new system. And what I've been doing, and what Gail's been doing, what Liz Kruger's been doing, and others have said of actively refusing real estate money, and everyone may have cast aspersions at me, I can't speak for the rest, for doing that. All of a sudden, a lot of the candidates who are running citywide are taking pledges at New York Communities for Change that they won't take corporate money, they won't take corporate PAC money, and that they won't take real estate money. And this was something that a handful of folks who were all the way out here did, and now it's becoming mainstream, and I think it's incredibly important. So as you evaluate who you're voting for on September 26th, I encourage you to go to nyccfb.info, click on follow the money, and click through the candidates and look who is paying them. Because if they're taking money from folks who aren't you, that means they're not working for you. Along those same lines, not taking from real estate allows folks like Gail and I to do things that upset the Real Estate Board of New York. And so we're working together with Friends of the Upper East Side Historic District, which is in my district, and Landmarks West, which is in Gail's old district. We've been able to move forward on a plan to close the loopholes. It's been something that's been pushed by a planner named George James, and we actually have to thank Community Board 11 for introducing him to us. And so we went to DCP. We have a map. It's quite detailed. I'm not going to go through the full presentation. We've been asking the mayor to do stuff against the super talls for quite a while, and this is a first step in the right direction. And this is part of a two-step process. The first step is going to cover all of the red zones on this map. The blue zones are already protected, and the yellow zones, they're coming back in June for. And so while sometimes folks might let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough, if we don't pat somebody on the back and say thank you when they take a step in the right direction, then why would they help us? Especially when Rebney is fighting us. Gail can speak to some of the other folks who've been fighting us from organized organizations in her district and others. And ultimately, in order to get this follow-up plan, which we hope is far better, we need to support the current one. And so I'd like to thank a lot of the boards. CB5 has already passed a resolution. CB8 already passed a resolution. CB6 passed a resolution. CB2, CB7's Land Use Committee has passed a resolution. It will be going to their full board. And I think one or two have said no unless there are conditions. And then many of the others have said supportive, but everyone is sharing a lot of the same conditions. I know that CB7 put together a really good document that shared a summary of what everyone was doing. And so I'm just asking for your support with conditions. It needs to be done by March 8th. It is a concurrent process with the Borough Board and the Borough President. And it will hopefully go to the City Planning Commission either March 13th or March 27th. So we'll ask you to come back in again. And then we will need all of your help when it goes to the council, hopefully in April, to see exactly what we can get away with in scope. I don't like 25 feet. I think it's too tall. I don't like 75 feet. I think it's too short. And so there's a lot more here. My legislative director, Wilfredo, would be very upset with me if I did not mention that we have a petition at benkalos.com/voids. Please consider signing. That is all.
Thank you. Okay, I haven't seen anyone else walk in. So we're going to move forward to the community board chair's discussion on the budget, and then afterward we will do community board chair reports and updates if time allows. Otherwise, if time does not allow, we're going to ask you to send your updates to us via email so that we can include it in the minutes. So, budget discussion. Anyone want to start? Bert?
Good morning, everybody. We have a budget task force, and we're reporting and sending copies of what we say to both the Borough President and to our electeds. I don't get too agitated about a preliminary budget. We're going to have at least 2 more iterations. So I don't really want to get into the minutia of this or that. I just want to put it in a larger perspective. Remember that any budget is a statement of priorities, of what we want, what we value. And we also have to remember that this budget, and I'm sorry I came a little late, so I don't know if this was presented in the beginning, has a $3 billion surplus. Take that in. A $3 billion surplus. And choices are made how to use that surplus. what usually happens is that surplus is transferred to the next year to help the year along, to pay down some debt. But remember, a $3 billion surplus. Does all of that have to be transferred? Just a question to throw out.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Yes, CV1.
Yeah, so our chair, Anthony Natar, couldn't be here today, so I'm just representing him. So one of the main points that he wanted me to bring up was coastal resiliency, and that we're over 6 years away from Superstorm Sandy, and the mayor's office still hasn't.
Talk up a little. I can't hear you.
And the mayor's office still hasn't given us a real comprehensive plan on how they're going to address resiliency. And from what I've heard, there's only $19.7 million for resiliency funding from the budget plan. And we feel that we just need more on that end to address these issues.
Can I just add something? The next time somebody says a young person cannot serve well on a community board, please look at this gentleman.
Anyone else?
This is something, my name is Tricia Shimamura, and I'm also representing Alita Camp, who can't be here today. I co-chair our Waterfront and Parks Committee, and I just wanted to jump on that and talk about the topics that some of the members of the public were talking about before, the importance of open space, the priorities that we put on climate, on resiliency efforts. All of our district is lined by the East River, and we are, of course, very grateful for the continued funding that goes into repairing it, but I think really, we discussed at length in our board, and we talked about it also with CB11 too, that we really need to start being more forward thinking about how we are looking at protecting our edges and also taking care of the open spaces that we have. One of our priorities that we put into our budget this year is additional funding to redesign a lot of our kind of precious park space to be more accessible, to meet the needs of more stakeholders in the communities. It's not just that we have our parks and we're happy with them, but we really need to start thinking about ways to invest in them, because we know that these are kind of precious resources that are only going to be put on more strain. It's harder and harder to find places to put new park space. It's harder and harder to find ways to become more resilient on the East River. I know it's a very particular estuary, but it's hard to protect. So just to add our voice to that, the more that we can to invest in sustainability and resiliency efforts, the better.
Yes, Roberta.
We're very concerned about NYCHA, that it's going to be privatized, that that the units are going to fall. You know, they may be safe for the short term, but the long term, and we're going to lose a huge chunk of affordable housing. We're going to lose residents of the community who aren't going to be able to stay in the community. So that's a major concern. We're also concerned with lighting here and sustainability. And one of the reasons we've been fighting so hard on the super talls is to maintain a sense of livability in the community. We have, there was an article in Sunday's Times about Riverside South, how it's become an isolated community, really for one class of people who can afford to live there, and not for all the people that normally live in a community.
Just want to piggyback on the NYCHA. That's definitely, so CB7 and CB9 have been doing a lot of work in trying to help focus awareness about some of the issues facing NYCHA. That has been continuing, and there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I also think that there's a consideration that many of the issues that's happening in NYCHA, as well as being a housing issue, turns up into being a health issue, a mental health issue as well. There was a spike towards the end of last year. There was a spike in suicides among NYCHA residents. So when money is being funded towards NYCHA, it's hopefully to, yes, fix up many of the problems that's happening there on a structural basis, but also there's a need to be concerned about the mental health issues of residents in Nigeria as well. The other thing, just piggybacking on the climate change, that's something that's important, and I don't know what funding is going to be in the Department of Environmental Protection or wherever, but we have been having a lot of issues around DEP. The wastewater treatment site is in our district, and we have been asking a lot of questions from DEP in terms of, like, a couple of years ago there was a spike in formaldehyde emissions, and there's still a final report that has not been given yet. It's supposed to be coming from the state. So, and how responsive they are to some of these actions. So that's something we definitely are concerned about. HDFC foreclosure, ground zero is basically community board 9. And so that's why we were asking about the housing question, HPE, how that's going to be done. I mean, it is about saving home ownership. And we saw this, there was something else there that showed low and moderate income. I don't know what low and moderate income is anymore. I know it's like 80,000, 100,000 for low moderate income. But truly having a plan that addresses that, I think, is really important. And whether or not many of these city-owned buildings can come back in the APRC, and the amount of tutoring and support and technical assistance that they need to provide it to residents so that they don't end up in foreclosure. Know that this is one of the bigger problems happening. So towards ensuring that there is access to HDFDC, but in maintaining and sustaining HDFC is very important as well. So,
Yes, no, sir.
So I piggyback off of everything that has been said here. I will say that today there's a press conference for funding for the Esplanade that's happening at 11, but we don't have enough funding. This is a meeting that Gail and I attended where we spoke about how the Esplanade is actually falling apart, especially here on 107th Street. That needs a large infusion of cash, and it needs to be done sooner rather than later. This is something that has been on everybody's radar for a long time, and yet it continues to deteriorate with no real urgency. I wanted to talk about NYCHA as well. I'm part of a housing organization, and I piggyback what Padmore said in what's low income. I will tell you that low income for everyone means something different. I have people who live in NYCHA who want to desperately get out of NYCHA, and when they come and apply through New York City Housing Connect, they don't even make the minimum. They don't even reach $10,000 because they're on Social Security or they're on disability. And so how are we looking to develop housing that targets those individuals through potential community developers? And what are the incentives that can be offered for those developers that actually truly create the kind of housing that we need? We have individuals in NYCHA who are living there because they have no other place to go and are actually hostages in their own homes because they're afraid of gang activity, or they can't get out, or they're infirm. So I urge you to look at funding for that. I will urge you to look at community-based organizations who are working with needle exchange programs where they come and they give needles, but on the back end they're not funded to have staff that is dedicated to pick up any discards. And what's happening is on large parts of our community where you walk and where there's children and where there's schools, you see a lot of discarded needles. That is a health hazard. I can go on, but everyone is bringing up different points, but I think that we have to be responsible when we fund organizations to do socially conscious programs, but when we don't actually look at it in its entirety, actually what started out as a good idea sometimes becomes a bad one. So I urge you to look at that as well.
Bird and then Patton.
Just a quick one, I want to put it on people's radar. It's not now, but it may be coming down the pipe. New York City Housing Authority, for many, many years, was the best administered, best maintained, best governed.
30 years ago. 30 years ago.
I said for many years. Not all of us were there at the time, okay? When the housing authority was run by what they used to call housers, okay? And when the other housing authorities around the country began to dilapidate, fall apart, one of the things they did was sell off and destroy public housing. The concept never even arrived in New York. Didn't cross any of the rivers, okay? I just want to put on people's radar. Under the current circumstances, we've already talked about privatization. What comes after privatization? Selling the buildings, destroying the buildings, redeveloping it. We'll get a chunk of money, we could use it someplace else for people. Just be careful, it's coming down the pipe.
So one other thing I think that has been somewhat underneath the radar, at least from my perspective, I haven't heard that much talk about it, but in the housing, around housing issues is when someone has been living in many of the changing neighborhoods for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and property value starts to increase, property tax increase, and some of these folks, their income is not increasing. So obviously it's beneficial for them that the value of the house is increasing, but it can't pay the property tax. And so there's tax abatements, but there is no, at least that I know of, tax abatement for anyone who has been living in a neighborhood for a certain amount of years. So that they do have the ability to benefit from all the changes happening around them and not being forced to sell because they can't afford it. And I think that's a big way of, I know folks in CB9 that are going through that problem. We've been trying to work with them in terms of speaking to Department of Finance, Department of Housing, around how they can decrease their property taxes. And there are others who have been there much less and they're getting much more tax abatements because they recently bought a new house and all the different things that come with it. So it's another way of how the communities are changing. And I think it's really subtle, but there's a lot of it.
Let me just go through the community
I
board
want to
chairs
speak
first.
just to the AMI piece that Elsa had brought up.
Will you defer for 1 second? Go ahead.
I've been working to try to get the mayor to do affordable housing in my district in south of 96th Street, and it has been largely unsuccessful. I would say there's 4 community boards at this table that are seeing the quote-unquote affordable housing pieces. All of it goes through the council when it is discretionary at the Finance Committee and the Planning Dispositions and Concessions Committee. One question might be for the budget is just whether or not more funding can be available for lower AMIs. And then ultimately, whether or not this Borough President's Land Use Division gets notices on the Article 11s, because, or if we should do legislation saying it has to go through the community board, because I am seeing north of 96th Street AMIs of 80% of AMI, which goes from 58,000 to 96,000 as a low point, and 165% of AMIs, which goes from $120,000 for a single person to $199,650 for a family of 6, and this is all north of 96. And so one of the questions I've been asking is the affordable housing that the government is subsidizing to the tune of billions gentrifying communities? And so I think it's just something to keep in mind. It's something, it just struck a chord with me, and I know it's partially budget, and HPD says they don't have the money to subsidize the lower bands, but it's a conversation we're having of, should we say you can't say affordable housing if it's over 80% or 60% or 30%?
So along those lines with affordable housing, we had our housing chair and some of the committee go to we have just 2 NYCHA buildings in our area in Community Ward 6, and but RAD presented last night to them. So they had a lot of questions about it and a lot of concerns, big concerns. So, we'll keep on top of that, but that's something, again, with affordable housing, we fight. It's not even low income, it's just, working class folks that are being kicked out of their District 6.
I was there, Molly.
Oh, good. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for going. But I do think that they sent a bunch of questions this morning and said that they were quite evasive and they didn't get some answers that they really wanted, so that's a concern. And then the other thing is our waterfront, and we do have a lot of resiliency issues. We have a small portion that's being dealt with the ESCR, East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, but we also have just we lack open space, we lack accessibility to our waterfront. It's mostly leased by EDC and a little bit of parks, not much parks, but it's leased out, so we don't have access to it, so we need open space. We continue to advocate for those things on our budget. Just fighting for, more parks, more parks people and so on. And then the other thing in our district is transportation, because we're Queenstown Tunnel and the Queensboro Bridge. We've had a death last week and some other accidents, people just getting hit by cars speeding, and we have 2nd and 1st and 3rd Avenue too. They're just very wide highways. Two of them are 1st and 2nd are designated as highways. So we need better enforcement, we keep asking for that, more enforcement, and then just some calming, some traffic design that might help with these things. So those are things that are in our budget. And we'll, in our letter to the mayor, we'll be continuing to advocate for those things.
Can I just add one thing? You mentioned the lack of open space. The CB6 is the one community board that has the least amount of open space, and then they're proposing through this East Side Coastal Resiliency to put a wall through one of your open spaces at Ashley Park, so that's a big issue.
We're fighting that.
Yes.
To continue on infrastructure, so I'm Leila Lucas, on Community Board 5. Vicky is actually unwell, so she is unable to attend. One budget issue that is on our radar is actually the lack of expected funding that we may see coming from the East Midtown rezoning. As you probably know, the very first project that was out of the gates for East Midtown is a project that actually was not identified by DCP, and as a result, the commitment and investments that they have, that they're mandated to do to the below grade infrastructure is non-existent. It is a huge lost opportunity, and I'm referring to the JP Morgan Chase headquarters. You probably know that actually the building sits above the train shed, and we learned that the MTA is actually planning or has to reconstruct the shed because it's deteriorated to a point that is beyond like general maintenance. So I think that as much as it may not be a line item in the budget, I think thinking creatively of ways to actually keep those developers to the spirit of the commitment of East Midtown rezoning, because the deal was really that, we're going to give you increased density, tremendous increased density, but in exchange you're getting us below grade transit improvements. So this particular building is going to pretty much almost double their capacity. They're going to bring like 6,000 more employees to this particular site. Those people are going to use the subways, and there is currently $0 committed by the developer to provide any improvements to transit. It is once again a huge lost opportunity, which hopefully is not a lost opportunity. Hopefully we can still get them on the hook to commit to some dollar amount. I do appreciate that they have to contribute to the fund, but the fund is for above grade improvements, and these above grade improvements are absolutely necessary and should not be diverted to below grade improvements. I also want to point out the fact that very unfortunately, although we had been told that all these air rights from landmarks were landlocked and had no opportunity to transfer using the existing mechanisms, we actually just found out that the St. Patrick's Cathedral is going to transfer 300,000 square feet of air rights to a site that is going to be redeveloped by Maclo using the antiquated zoning text article, the 7479, that does not call for any contribution. I was actually so shocked because naively I thought that once East Midtown was enacted, the 7479 in East Midtown was retired, and it is not. So St. Patrick's, who had been telling us, I have no receiving side, I can't transfer my air rights, 300,000 generating zero contribution. And because of the location of the site, there is no requirement for any below grade improvements. Once again, really a missed opportunity. And on really on the budget front, we need to get ways to actually plug those, little, quirks of the law. We're like debugging East Midtown. There has to be a way to get money from these developments because it was, for below grade improvement, because it was the spirit of the rezoning.
Anyone else?
No one else on those.
Sure.
Just,
Cicely Harris, Community Board 10. Really quickly, I agree with everything that everyone has said, especially about housing. In Harlem, we are definitely facing a housing crisis. What is low income, what is affordable. But I also wanted to speak about what Nelson said about the needle sharing programs. We have a lot of needle sharing programs in our area, and our biggest issue is after the patients receive their medicine, what happens to the patients? They are released out on the street, they loiter about, they go into our open spaces, into our parks, and it has an unsafe feel for a lot of the residents. There needs to be a more complete wraparound service in the needle sharing programs, like what after they receive their medicine, what do they do? Can they stay in the facility a little bit longer as they come down? And what after they come down, will there be a program for them to attend for job services or something like that to help them instead of just giving them the medicine and just sending them out into the streets?
Just to piggyback off what Cicely said, I attended a meeting at the West 125th Street bid, and that was one of their major concerns, that on 124th and 125th, there's a high, I believe there's a methadone program there, and there's two other programs by.
5 methadone programs.
Or 5. But there was one that, for whatever reason, was housed and was causing a lot of loitering, was causing a lot of chaos for a lot of the businesses that were there, and then one program that came to represent was not actually from that program. There was from another CBO that apparently does their due diligence in trying to work with their patients. But that's a large issue in West 125th Street, as well as the East Side. We have a tremendous issue on 125th in Lexington that has become, well, it has always had an issue, but it's more so now. And I think that I agree with Cicely, when we fund these programs, they're not always thought with the community in mind. There's a Band-Aid to fix one problem, but they don't realize how they impact, the rest of the community. So that's something that needs to be looked at.
Okay.
Yeah. So just speaking of that, we actually had a meeting with one of the facility that provide a methadone clinic, and they have agreed to form an advisory council with board members, community residents, as well as folks from that clinic to sit on that clinic. So it may be something that could be done at other spaces as well, to have community input, businesses input, to try and ensure that that's not loitering, it's not necessarily happening. The other thing I wanted to talk really briefly on was justice involving individuals. So I saw that there was a $756 million allotment, $765.6 million allotment for the Department of Corrections. But that money is just to go to the construction of new jails, and I think that you're saying it's not even enough.
Right.
But then they're supposed to try and close Rikers, and they're supposed to decrease the amount of people that's in Rikers, so there'll be more people coming out. So where's the money for that? Because they're going to need a variety of services, a lot of support. We recently formed the Upper Manhattan Collaborative for Justice. We're having a conference coming up very soon, next Thursday, where we are looking to bring all the organizations that do provide support to justice-involved individuals to form a close and tighter network, at least for West Harlem in general. Recently, the district attorney in Manhattan gave money for an RFP, $3.5 million, to provide support to West Harlem. So that's an investment, right? It's not enough, but it's an investment. So we wanted to see if some of that money that's going to the construction of more jails could be diverted to supporting services for folks that are coming back to the community.
You were next, here, CB8, and then CB7. Go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on what Nelson and Cicely were talking about before. This is not something necessarily that that we see a lot in CB8, but just personally, I have a lot of experience working with those wraparound services, and I'm a social worker, and I cannot agree with you more. I think that in general, when looking at every part of our city, the ability to have wraparound services when it comes to addiction and when it comes to like providing everybody not just medication, but job providing services, counseling services, just health and general clinic services. Really, I think that this should be a push throughout the city, and we should. And I'm 100% sure that our community board would be supportive too of calling for centers that are really looking to treat people holistically. I think it reduces addiction. I think it improves the entire community feel, and it makes everybody feel more so that they're contributing to this together. And I will say that we're not alone. That community board is not completely excluded from this. We've heard from particularly our public housing developments that addiction is still something that we face there too. And I don't necessarily think that we're doing a full job of helping and caring for our neighbors in those areas as well yet. But I think that the more we can do wraparound services, the more that we can look at it not just for methadone clinics, but really trying to treat people wholly is the best way that we can move forward on this problem.
Yes, Roberta.
I'd like to discuss youth. I don't think we're putting enough money into the summer programs for the kids and into youth services. We've had a bit of gang violence in Frederick Douglass houses, and it turns out that the captain of the 2-4, who really works out with the kids, couldn't decide whether they should work with the kids that are at risk of joining the gangs or the kids that are in the gangs. So, you know, it shouldn't be a choice.
Yeah.
There should be money to do both, or, you know, or resources, or whatever it is.
Nelsa?
So in terms of homelessness, and this is just my personal view, right? We keep building shelters, and we don't have enough places to build affordable housing, affordable to low income and stuff. But one of the things that I know we had way in the past, and was single room occupancy buildings that were phased out, right? Just because. But I think that the city needs to be creative, and it shouldn't just be shelters that keep being built, because everyone is 1 or 2 paychecks away. Not everyone. Some people are away from being homeless. And so we keep putting people in these shelters, and then they don't find housing because landlords don't take their vouchers. And then there's this endless cycle, and more people become homeless, and we build more shelters. And so I was speaking with Piorina Sanchez a while ago, and one of the things that we were discussing was potentially a pilot program of one SRO, redesigned in such a way that people who are single, as opposed to being afraid to going into shelters and sharing a room or whatever, that would be a design that could be looked at to be updated for now and for the needs and everything that we know in terms of social services, in order to try to get single people who are afraid to go into shelters, almost like little mini studios, to be looked at. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That's not part of the budget discussion, but I think that the city has to be creative in how it tackles the homeless situation. I think we keep looking at everything through the same lens over and over. We have shelters, we have this and that, but I don't think there's enough creative thoughts, creative people at the table to try to see how they can start fashioning a response that could actually be helpful to the communities where homelessness impacts at a very high rate.
Affordable housing and creative ideas for affordable housing, I agree. We do have, just as an example, a safe haven run by BRC in our district. It houses about, I think, 28 people, and it just started last August or so, but it's been very successful. I think there are some other safe havens in the city, and some, I think Roberta or someone else had said that they've been successful for them too, and they get people off the streets, and they have 24/7 care, and mental health care, and doctors, and they seem to really love it, and the people there, a lot of success stories around safe havens, and that's just that's that middle SRO maybe creative idea there we should fund more of
People need
those.
services.
Yes.
People need with services.
Yeah.
Jessica?
I just want to throw a quick comment in as we're talking about the wraparound services, youth programs, even providing shelters, just to keep in mind the human service contracts. It's something that this office has been real involved in and that we've listed as one of our priorities in the past is that, when we fund human service contracts, folks who run all these programs, we can make sure that they have cost of living increases and that they're adequate contracts so they can actually provide quality programming in the community. So the whole notion of who's providing the services is something that is in the budget. It's the human service contracts. Throw it out there.
Any more comments on the budget? Okay, so we'll move into community board updates. Community board 12.
Thank you. We have approved, and our executive committee, the mechanical voids text amendment from DCP, and we will be presenting it on Tuesday to our full board for approval. In addition, we've had scoping meetings on Monsignor Kett Park Playground, which is a $14 million playground. There's been proposals which they're now looking at to put special needs into that program since there are no special needs playgrounds north of 96th Street. We also will be doing more research on the spray shower facility in Ann Loftus Playground, and that is also something which will be brought back to the board to look at the final approval. We will be moving into our rezoning committees and commitments. We are, that is a big thing that took place in August in terms of rezoning, and we will be following up on that and monitoring that situation very, very closely. Essentially, that's the report of what's going on in CB12.
Thank you very much. CB11.
Hello, everyone. The diversion center that is a pilot that will be happening in East Harlem has come to our public safety and our health committees to discuss the center and what they're looking to work on with people from 16 to 25 individuals, and so that is currently going to be under construction, so that will be something that we will be following as that goes along. The MTA had a construction forum which was very, very well attended. There was at least 200 people online before the doors opened, and so they had buy-in from citywide, but in addition to a lot of East Harlem residents came to find out about the apprenticeship programs and how they can work in construction with the MTA and non-traditional women jobs, and we have a lot of representation there as well. The 125th Street corridor is an issue for us, and the 25th precinct, in addition with CB11 and other CBOs, will be having a forum, an event there in March. I'll send you all the information as soon as we have the flyer. The issue of public bathrooms for the community is something that has been brought to the attention of CB11. Picture the Homeless this week had an event regarding that, and so CB11 will be looking at that closely. I mentioned that today there will be a press conference at Thomas Jefferson regarding the funding that has been awarded for the redevelopment of the East Harlem, the Esplanade, not the East Harlem, Esplanade, from 63rd to 125th. The Department of Sanitation Advisory Group continues to meet to talk about a space. Potamkin is one of the sites that has been looked at, and then with an eye to a permanent location. CB11 also approved the mechanical text amendments as well as the East Harlem rezoning follow-up actions that came before us. Thank you.
Okay, CB10.
Hello again, Cicely Harris. Today we do have a presentation on the mechanical text amendments for our land use group, and then we will bring it to exec board next week and to our general board meeting the following week, March 6th, I think, the general board meeting. So we hope to get that done later. We are still working on park safety. our 116th and Adam Clayton Powell Park. It is the 8th at Randolph Park. We've been having a lot of issues there with drug use and homelessness. So we have been working with the Parks Department to figure out what are some better uses for that space and what can we do to make the space more welcoming to a lot of other folks, but still incorporate policing and, again, the wraparound services for the folks that need them in the park, that are using that park. We had a sanitation discussion with CB11. We are hearing and feeling their pain about the equipment that they've been storing for CB10.
To consolidate.
Yes. So we're looking at ways to kind of alleviate that strain. Maybe there could be a plan where we bring our trucks into CB10 or do a consolidated effort together, but we're definitely having that discussion. Yes. Really recapping, we did have our marijuana info session for CB10. A lot of people came thinking they were going to figure out how to get that license, marijuana license, and sell, but that was not what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about the social issues that are going to come from the passing and legalization of marijuana and how that is going to affect CB10 and a lot of our people that have been disproportionately affected by marijuana laws. So we had that session. It was packed. Like I said, people were disappointed at first because they thought they were going to learn how to make some money, but we're trying to figure out how to survive in this new system. We have a Women's History Month event coming up. We're going to talk about the pay disparities between Black and white women and how we need to all come together and have these discussions before we're all marching for women's rights, but there's a lot of things within our community as women that we need to discuss. And we need to talk about taking our own economic futures into our hands and not depending so much on the industry and the environment that way. So we have that new forum coming up. That's going to be March 18th. I'm going to send that out to everyone.
Thank you. CB9.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Black History Month. So first and foremost, I want to just say that out of a lot of work that we have done over the past year, we are going to be having a first conference for the Upper Manhattan Collaborative for Justice, which brings together a lot of organizations that provide support for the justice-involved individuals. That will be happening next Thursday. And also asking for folks who are formerly incarcerated as well so that they can come and give their input about what are some of the challenges and barriers they have faced and how best to overcome those. So we are hoping to be able to see that as a kickoff to working more collaboratively with other communities and community boards as well. Lieutenant Governors are going to be attending, and how we can work for the small amount of investment that's out there and how to make it most beneficial. We actually have voting in the general board today for a text amendment at our board to kind of put those two together. So it came passed out of our Housing and Land Use Committee, and we're coming up today. We also want to say this Saturday, February 23rd from 11 to 2, there is a follow-up for, I've been mentioning about the Marion Sims statue that was taken down and its replacement, and it's supposed to be going up. There will be an artist selection process that's going to be beginning this Saturday in terms of determining which artist or artist group will be coming together to work on developing the replacement for the J. Marion Sims statue on 103rd and 5th Avenue. And I just want to, and we also will be having a larger discussion around legalization of marijuana in Community Board 9 in terms of its impact, what's going to be expected, how the community can best be involved, how the community can ensure that it won't be steamrolled or any other negative impacts that may come down. So we just want to be ahead of that as much as possible. And I just want to close with an interesting article that was in the New York Times yesterday on a gentleman by the name of Hewlin Jack, who was the first black world president. I encourage all of you to read it. It's a pretty interesting read. He was quite an interesting character. There was some shady stuff going on with him, but I am sure that his legacy continues to impact all of us today.
this picture, if you go down towards the other side of the lobby, pictures there, along with everybody else's, all the dead people were voting.
I do have to run a little bit.
Okay, CB8.
Hi, good morning again, everybody. My name is Tricia Shimamura, and I'm filling in for, I'm second vice chair, filling in for Alita Camp today. So this last month we held, or I think it was at the last month we held a joint housing meeting to focus on the NYCHA Next Generation Infill project. I'm sure Alita has talked about this with at the Borough Board before, but we really want to thank our Borough President and our council member for coming to this meeting. It's really discussing what is going to be the first infill project of many that's planned throughout the city, and it's really just heartbreaking to see what's going on. Basically, the city is going to be getting $25 million to fix for repairs for one of the two NYCHA buildings that are at this site. That one building needs actually closer to $36 million to just get it into a state of good repair, and we're only getting 25. I believe the other building needs around north of $50 million, and it's not being touched. In response to this, we're losing air quality, we're losing the playground, we're losing light, we're losing our sense of community, and this last meeting was one of the first meetings that the NYCHA residents were really able to voice their concerns, and it's just a shame to see how late in the process it was that where they really were able to speak about what's happening in their homes. So we still firmly believe that this process should go through a ULURP process. We applaud the Borough President for sending for a letter, I believe yesterday, to the Mayor's office calling for this. We're still trying to fight this with everything that we have, and just want to warn everyone else because it's coming your way. If you have a NYCHA Infill Next Gen project coming your way, this is, really, we're just going to keep telling everyone that this is really setting the standard for what will be coming into other neighborhoods as well. Last night we did, I'm happy to talk about that more later, but last night we also did approve the zoning text amendment. We approved it, but just so you know, we approved it and then added some just recommendations for things for the city planning to look at in the future. Particularly, what we think it's a good step, but this only applies to enclosed mechanical voids, whereas this has nothing to do with unenclosed spaces. And for our neighborhood and for the neighborhood surrounding us, some of these super tall towers have unenclosed spaces, and this would not affect them. We think that the 25-foot and 25-foot, 75-foot limit thresholds are inappropriate, and I've asked to look at those again. We've asked for ceiling heights to be looked at as well. We still think that this is just not there yet, but we didn't want to not approve and not support the plan. So just keep that in mind as you're going to look at it as well. We took a lot of cues from CB6 and CB5 who recently took this up, and I think that collectively all the points that are being made are strong. We have a small business roundtable coming up on March 11th. We've been, of course, concerned about the loss of retail spaces, along some of our avenues, and so our meeting on March 11th during the daytime, which is really exciting. We've partnered with the Chamber of Commerce to meet with our meet with our small business retailers in the daytime, and a time where they can actually meet, and that makes sense for the small businesses to meet to talk about some of their needs. So we'll be reporting on that. And then finally, this is just I chair Parks and Waterfront, or co-chair Parks and Waterfront, and recently we held a dog forum in our community. It was 7 degrees, and I expected 0 people to show up, but we had 40 people show up in 7-degree weather to talk about dogs in the neighborhood and how we can better coexist together. It's a quality of life issue, but honestly, if you talk to people about it, people do not they get very passionate very quickly about where they're allowed to use their dog, to have their dogs, and then people who don't own dogs are very concerned about streets and parks, and it just gets wildly passionate very quickly.
Oh yeah. That and biking.
Oh yeah. Yeah, basically. So I was really proud of our community board for taking this on. I was really proud of taking on the discussion. It was lively, but it was not disrespectful, and it really just brought up a lot of points that we need to look at those spaces. We need to look strategically at our neighborhood and find ways that we can better coexist. Education is a big piece of it, trying to get everybody to just agree to some basic principles of wanting to preserve our space, wanting to make sure that the space is welcoming to all, making sure people feel safe, that their needs are being met. So we're trying slowly but surely to take steps in the right direction, and if anybody else is dealing with this, I'd love to talk to you about it, or love to talk to your Parks Department about it. It was a really productive first meeting, and I think that we're going to be moving forward, and it looks like we have kind of engagement and commitment from both sides, from both dog owners and non-dog owners, and I think it's a really promising first step to try to not avoid an issue, but take it head on.
Okay, CB7.
So we had our land use meeting last night. We thank Councilmember Kalis and Councilmember Rosenthal for being there. We had one of our board members put up a list of all the objections or additions that the different boards wanted, and then we had our own, and we voted on each of those individually. I think all the other boards will be happy with what we voted on. We're looking at unenclosed voids. We're looking at commercial space. So it's in the process of being rewritten. As soon as the draft is ready, I will send it around. On DNS and budget, we have one of our brand new board members is taken over the Budget and Strategy Committee, and we're re-energizing how we look at the budget, how we look at how we get every committee engaged, so that all board members are at least aware that there's a DNS. We've tried this before, but I think this year it's going to really work well. I've had some members misbehaving publicly, and I've had to send emails to several of them. And I had somebody challenge me at steering that I was not telling the truth. I did persevere, and I was telling the truth. I had gotten word from the conflict of interest board about something, and they challenged whether I'd actually called and who I'd spoken to. We did a walking trip of playgrounds, and we discovered that we've been looking at playgrounds that people don't even know exist. So we are now going to do more walking trips of getting people out into the community to really look at whatever the problems are. We met with Noel about the new computer program to track our community the CRM, and we're in the process of deciding to become one of the partners.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. CB6, if you give me a moment, we're gonna go to CB3, who has to leave to another meeting. So, Alicia Lewis Coleman, please.
So, yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you for letting me speak next. Happy New Year, Happy Lunar New Year to everyone from CB3. I am grateful to be here this morning because I'm normally at work. So this is such a blessing to be in Borough Board around all the leaders and people of the community. So we have just two things, major things that are really going on. There's always a lot going on in CB3, but two things that we're dealing with right now on our forefront is the Rivington House. So that's been in and out of controversy over the past couple of years, but now we have something new coming down the pipeline from Beth Israel and Mount Sinai. They have proposed to lease the space, and in doing that, they're planning on putting their behavioral science facility in that particular space, which I want to say it is so needed. We do need a behavioral science component in that area in our Lower East Side, something of that nature, because it will be a comprehensive facility, and there are many families that do not have that type of service. If they do have mental health units that are in the Lower East Side, they're often not connected to primary care. And this is not to leave out the fact that we still need a skilled nursing home facility in the Lower East Side. We by far know that that is another major need that we have in that particular area. However, this component will offer very valuable services to many of the families and people in this particular need in our area. So one of the issues that we're having with Beth Israel currently is that on their website, they're not taking all insurances as they said they were. They do not take Oxford and they do not take United Healthcare. There are two members on our board who've had family difficulties most recently in this capacity, and they were not able to get serviced. And so they had to seek out services in another part of another community in order to get the needs met of their family members. So we're looking into that and being very open and having the borough president work with us on this matter as well. And the last thing is the detention center, which is, CB1 and I, and we're working along with CB2. We're all in this together. And looking at passing our resolution, and it will be voted on in the month of April. So please be on the lookout for that and what that's going to entail, because we know that reform needs to happen, and we know that Rikers needs to go through this transformation, but we also need to keep in mind the needs of the community as well. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our community members. And so that's it from CB3 at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
CB6.
Hello, everyone. As you can tell, I am not Molly. Unfortunately, she had to leave. I'm Jesus Perez, the district manager of CB6. CB6 recently wrote a resolution supporting the mechanical void text amendment, though we do wish the amendment would go farther, as mechanical voids aren't really the only loopholes of this variety that need to be closed. CB6 supported the text amendment as a first step in reforming the zoning rules that affect many of our districts. As you heard earlier, CB6 continues to monitor the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project. They will be appearing before the March 25th Land Use and Waterfront Committee of CB6. And we're very eagerly awaiting their presentation, because we are not happy with the current plans, as you've heard, to build a 10-foot wall down Astor Levy Park, one of the few parks that we have in our district, a park that Community Board 6 and our former Councilman Dan Garodnick fought very hard to attain. So we're hoping for the city's next presentation on this matter to focus more on that and other Community District 6 issues, because their last presentation to us did focus very heavily on the matters that are important to Community District 3, our neighbors to the south. So we specifically asked them for more information on CB6 matters. CB6's Transportation Committee is tackling the issues of blocked bus lanes and placard abuse in our district. Since we can't boast as many subway lines as the West Side has, our north-south bus lines are vitally important to the residents of our district. Excuse me. Making it, and with many of those bus lanes blocked, it makes it a painfully slow ride for many folks. And so we wrote a resolution last month regarding that, and we're essentially asking members of the community to send us pictures of blocked bus lanes, where you saw it, when you saw it, and we'll be using that to mount a good case for more reform. We actually had one of our board members who went on his bike during rush hour and sort of rode down our bus lanes and sort of said, oh, they're blocking, they're blocking, they're blocking. Actually, some of the local press picked it up, and it was going around a little viral on Twitter, so we were happy to see that. And also, given the intros before the City Council regarding placard abuse, which is a problem in our district, the Transportation Committee will be debating a resolution on this topic at its March 4th meeting. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. CB5, Leila.
All right, I'm Leila Lukiziko. I'm the acting chair for the Land Use Committee, as well as the chair of the Landmarks Committee for CB5. Vicky is unfortunately unwell, so she's unable to be here today, and she asked me to deliver a report. We were busy with the Land Use Committee, like any other community board this month, looking at the mechanical void zoning text amendment. Community Board 5 concurs with the comments and the evaluation that other boards have made of the proposal. We thank our elected officials. Keith Powers and Ben Kalos appeared to both our committee meeting and full board. We're very appreciative for their support. The vast difference for Community Board 5 is that we're mostly excluded from the proposal, and therefore there was no way we could support a proposal that, although good, is not covering us. And we're gravely concerned because we have identified 5 extremely soft sites. Just so you are all aware, 2 days after the Department of City Planning certified their zoning text amendment, 5 demolition permits were pulled for buildings on 57th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues. So waiting for Community Board 5, or certainly for this stretch of Community Board 5, also known as Billionaires Row, which is heavily residential, although no resident lives there, is really crucial. So we did issue a denial unless all the conditions that the other boards have noted are included, including the fact that 25 foot is too much, 75 foot is not enough. It should address mechanical voids and structural voids, so we certainly believe that it's a great first step. We really appreciate that the administration finally recognizes that there is a problem, but we want a better text, and certainly we want coverage for Community Board 5, and we really need it now. It's acutely important that 57th Street be included in this current first phase. We also looked at a letter that has been actually drafted and initiated by Community Board 7, to which we're very grateful, calling for a set of policy changes and zoning tax amendments to actually deal with the super tolls. We are very appreciative of CB7 leadership on this issue. I think that CB7, CB8, CB6, CB4, CB, all of us really are dealing with this trend of new super tolls. It goes to the issue of livability. It goes to the issue of our open space not being protected by any zoning laws in the books to mitigate shadow impact on open public space, which is really problematic. Our biggest concern, as you know, and Community Board 5 has been on record dealing with that since 2015, is the shadows that these tall buildings cast on Central Park. I actually took comfort in 2015 for the smirk that I could see on people's faces, and I felt, well, maybe it's not that big a deal. And today people look at me like, yeah, you were right. And I hate being right. I can't even tell you how much I hate being right on this one. We really appreciate that CB7 is actually, bringing this issue back to the forefront and demanding that, steps are being taken. CB5 passed a resolution supporting the language of CB7, and really hope that the other community boards will follow suit on that. We had also a busy landmarks committee meeting with 2 applications. One was for the New York Public Library. They're doing some alterations to the south side of the exterior, and what was interesting is that they are proposing yet again to carve the name of their main donor on yet another facade of the building. So that my understanding is that it would be the 5th engraving of Mr. Schwartzman's name on the marble of the public library. The committee had, and the full board had, issues with that. They're also proposing the carving of another donor on a prominent flower bed that will be in the middle of a newly created terrace, and we felt that it was a little too conspicuous. So we voted to recommend that these inscriptions be a little more discreet. And then finally, we were pleased to hear that JP Morgan Chase has agreed to redesign their newly proposed headquarters at 270 Park Avenue with a 10,000 square foot of private space open to the public. We pushed very hard, and we're very grateful to Borough President Gail Brewer for her support and her fantastic, amazing letter of recommendation on this particular issue. And we're very eager to see what it looks like. We haven't seen the new plans yet, but we're very eager to see how they figured out to include those 10,000 square feet that they told us adamantly that they couldn't give us. It was not feasible, and now it is. So we're very, very pleased for that. Also very pleased for the support from our council member, Keith Powers. And that basically concludes what CB5 was doing this month.
Thank you. So we have 8 more minutes. Can I just double check if CB2 walked in? No. Okay. So CB4 followed by CB1, and then we'll be going into the public hearing by DCP. Yes.
Okay, quickly, I just want to, though they've left Padmore and Sicily, to raise my awareness of marijuana. It's coming down the pike. I just came back from California, and I realized I was seeing signs like Marijuana Lounge. And it wasn't just the name of, it was a real place to go smoke. So maybe this is coming, and I'm going to put it on our executive committee agenda for coming up on Monday to see what we can do. Just quickly, Gateway. On the new funding bill that went through Congress, there was supposedly some money for Gateway. We're sitting down with a Congress member on tomorrow afternoon to see what the reality of this is, because even though it's a regional project, there are many development areas in our district that are contingent upon the construction of Gateway, just in terms of the mechanicals, the siting, so we've got to know what's going on there. We're working on landmarking, moving our landmarking for Hell's Kitchen, some parts of Hell's Kitchen. Charter revision, we're coming out with a report, budget, the voids, we're all going to have executive, and then first week in March we're having some resolutions on that. And we're having a community group is coming up with a plan for the area south of the Port Authority with the new redevelopment, and they're going to be presenting it to our different committees, coming before the full board, and the board will perhaps adopt it and make it part of our goals. That's all I have to say quickly.
We're going to be transitioning after CB1 to the text amendment discussion. Can folks please come and sit around the table? So when we have the text amendment discussion, is more of a discussion. Can you please sit around the table? Feel free, just come up. We have about 5 empty chairs here and 2 empty chairs on this side. Thank you. Yes,
Devin. Okay, great. Yeah. Hi, I didn't introduce myself actually. I'm Devin Chu. I'm the co-chair of the Traffic and Transportation Committee in CB1, covering for Anthony Natoro. So I already spoke a little before about coastal resiliency, but I just want to add on that we learned that the Army Corps of Engineers will be holding a series of meetings in our community, and so we look forward to working with them on creating a comprehensive plan on further addressing coastal resiliency. With regards to the East River Esplanade, CB1 is working closely with EDC to release an RFP for the development, and we look forward to further working with them on that. With regards to the zoning text amendment, with the voids, we have approved a resolution supporting the change, and we look forward to working with other community boards on this issue. And then with regards to placard abuse, so we applaud Councilmember Margaret Chin for her sponsorship of legislation to solve this problem. And several of our communities have seen a takeover of streets by legal parking. So this really means a lot to our community. Another thing I want to bring up is congestion pricing. I know that this is something that's coming in the future. but it's something that we're discussing currently in our committee, and something that we also look forward to working with other community boards on. And with regards to the borough-based jails, we're working with CB3 and CB2 on this, but we just look for input from all our community members on further kind of thinking through this issue together.
Thank you very much. Madam Borough President?
Just very quickly, there are quite a few things we're working on. I think you heard about the homes. This is the letter. If anybody wants it, we can pass it around. The infill and should be ULURP. I just want to say one thing about NYCHA. I want to thank Board 6 because it was an excellent meeting with the building on 28th Street that NYCHA wants to do, not just the Section 8 RAD, but something called PACT. And the reason I mention it is it also is going to apply to Board 7, the Wise Towers. Those are the only two in the borough of Manhattan. The problem is lots of issues. One of them for me is I do not want a private developer in charge of NYCHA anywhere. There are a couple, but we don't need to make it a citywide issue. So a nonprofit should be the one involved with these PAC programs. So without getting into all the specifics, I'm making it a big issue. I testified at the NYCHA hearing on this topic, and we will continue. We are working on the elevator issues in the subways just like everybody else. We have a study that's up on our website because we went to all the elevators. Do they work? Do they not work? Same thing with the issue of broadband and bandwidth in the schools. We have a report on that. There's not a lot of bandwidth. If you don't have bandwidth, you can't do the academics that everybody's so concerned about. We are very concerned about the issues that you have brought up. Rikers, we have a task force. We are working as part of the mayor's task force. In addition, I know all the community boards are involved. It's a very, very challenging on so many different levels, as you know, to figure out how 125 White comes down, gets built correctly with less residents. Who knows how that's going to happen? Faith-based, the churches and the synagogues and maybe the mosques are up for sale everywhere in Manhattan. And in Albany, I was there at the Black and Latino Caucus. That came up as Board 10's folks and people from the community were concerned. We are working as hard as we can to try to save some of the churches in Harlem. But I think we need, and I know that I want to thank Landmarks Conservancy and your staff because everywhere that input is helpful. Without getting into all the specifics, everyone should be looking at what are the churches for sale, what are the synagogues for sale, and how are we going to repurpose them for whatever you think is appropriate. It is an endless discussion. I want to mention also, in terms of the environment that came up, the Solid Waste Advisory Board, I hope, and I know many of you know members who are on it, is going to come up with what should Manhattan look like if we're going to have a Green Deal, and it doesn't have any specifics in Washington. What's our Green Deal for Manhattan? What is it that we should be focused on so that we have a sense of how the community boards can advocate for what a really green Manhattan looks like? I just want to also mention some of the other task forces we are working on. We'll have as we have in the past, a group to look at the disabled because there are so many Manhattanites who are disabled. We're doing that. We continue congressional pricing was just mentioned. We are going to have a meeting to bring together because you always hear the outer boroughs have a concern. I happen to support congressional pricing, but it has to be done right. But guess what? You're going to hear Manhattanites scream and yell where they can put their car, where they can't put their car, how much it costs, and blah, blah, blah. It is not just an outer borough issue. We have to have the specifics. We also have an issue now. The mayor has set aside some money. This is the general idea, without getting into all the specifics, for after-school programs in schools, wants the borough presidents to have some input into it. It is so complicated, but I just want to let you know we are going to be part of it. I think Brooklyn Borough President was the first to ask the money and the input to be at the borough president level. I think it's a little crazy, but we sent a letter, we'll get you copies. It's okay, but we need the following criteria because how do we know what is a good program, who should get waived, after school fees, etc. You may have some input from your persons who are working on this topic. Small business, we have a task force also working to see what happens as a result of the city council legislation that has had a hearing, but there's been no final ruling as to what the small business Jobs Act or the equivalent will look like, if it does even exist. One of the issues we're working on is data for the vacancies. If you got a vacant storefront, we have no idea what the numbers are. We walked up and down Broadway, we found 188. That is just hearsay. What is the exact number? So we need that legislation to pass. I think it will. It is sponsored by me and the speaker. We are also very concerned, I think, we work a lot with the consul generals. That's a group that doesn't fall under or over the radar, but they do, they're almost like the city halls for their country. And so we're having a reception. If you want to attend, let us know. We do it every year at the library. We invite all the consul generals, and they all show up. And this is from the smallest to the largest countries. And sometimes it's helpful to see what can they do in our neighborhoods. We have events coming up, as you know. We have all of the leadership training series that Alden Benillo has so carefully put together, and they're incredibly well attended. We also have Black History Month next week, February 27th, and as you know, the State of the Borough, February 24th at NYU. The Black History Month is with Black folks who've been working on politics, and so it's great interest going to be at the Manhattanville campus of Columbia University. I think that's it. I want to thank everybody for being here.
Thank you. Department of City Planning.
Yes.
Okay. So we are starting the public hearing session on the text amendment. And we're working on some
You can start the
fixing some
presentation.
Okay, so thank you so much for giving DCP an opportunity to present our text amendment proposal for excessively large mechanical buoys, which have been highlighted by a few proposals in Upper East Side, West Side, and some in the south of Central Park area. So we are. Hopefully in the next few minutes we cover the presentation. But so basically the currently the New York City zoning resolution allows mechanical floor space to be excluded from the zoning floor area calculations. There's no very specific height limit to that space, and in last several years, a handful of developers utilize that zoning, exclusion to take advantage of it and utilize excessively large mechanical space to raise the first residential floor above all the surrounding context. Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you so much. Here you go. So, that excessively large mechanical space, we are calling it a mechanical voice. And back in early 2018, Mayor de Blasio, talked to the community at his town hall meetings, and he asked DCP to look into what is actually happening and where and when those techniques are being used. So over the last 12 plus months, DCP has looked into very much every single construction permit in non-contextual district where taller towers are permitted, and examined, what is where those techniques are being used, and when and where those mechanical void spaces are being used. So based on our survey of several hundred construction permits, we have determined what a typical tower contains, what kind of mechanical space a tower contains. And the example here shows, so typical tower has a mechanical space in the lower section of a building, typically between non-residential floors and residential floors, which makes sense when mechanical space can serve the the non-residential commercial community facility space down below, as well as the residential units up to the north. And the taller towers, like a 30+ towers, often has an additional mechanical space every 15 to 20 feet, 20 stories in the middle of the tower. So this could be two distributed or one combined in the middle. And they usually have larger mechanical bulkhead on the top of the building. And when we compare, some buildings against the typical tower configurations we determined, we found these, several towers with excessive mechanical space. We haven't really seen middle range. It's usually typical range or excessive. There wasn't really middle range, a 40 feet, a 50 feet middle range. It's always typical or 100 feet. So that's that's a very significant sign of when the buildings are utilizing that kind of technique. So the example to the left from your side is one contiguous mechanical void that is located in the lower section of the building. And the middle example has large mechanical void right above 150 feet from the street level. It's just reacting to zoning requirements to pack certain amount of density below 150 feet. So the moment the building satisfies that, parking rule, they tend sometimes have an excessively large mechanical voids, so that those upper units can be sold for much higher price. The last example here shows multiple mechanical floors, less than 20 feet each, but clustered in very specific section of a building, typically in the lower section. And these has 4 floors, and those 4 floors are broken into 2 segments in the middle, but it's concentrated in the lower section of the building. So our proposal will address these 3 types of buildings. So our goal is obviously to limit the use of artificially tall residential mechanical voids. We want to encourage residential buildings that activate and engage with their surroundings, rather than allowing them to have a large mechanical voids on the street level, ignore all the surrounding context, and residential units are sited right above it. People see the void, or even if the voids are covered with a fancy facade, there's no activity or sign of human activities behind those facades. So we don't want to discourage that kind of techniques. And at the same time, we really wanted to make sure that we don't preclude good and efficient mechanical configurations for residential buildings. This is very important. We hear that net zero sustainable buildings sometimes require larger mechanical space than typical traditional building typologies. People seem to think when technology goes up, mechanical space tends to be smaller, but sometimes you need bigger fans to move more air efficiently than smaller fans that is spinning so hard and pushing so little air. So, we've been talking to engineers and sustainable building consultants to recognize and understand the need for upcoming technology or becoming more popular technology. And finally, we want to continue to support flexibility in Tower District for building design excellence. So our basic goal is to modify residential tower floor area regulations to count excessively large mechanical voids. Here we are saying if a mechanical space is more than 25 feet in height, that portion of the mechanical space above 25 feet will start counting tower zoning floor area. It's designed to be an incentive than just like a standard ban of mechanical space taller than 25 feet, because we think there could be a potential of a building requiring a mechanical space that is taller than 25 feet. Like, one example is the bigger fan that is increasingly required by building codes and energy efficiency code. So if a developer have to have mechanical space that is a little above 25 feet, they can still do it, but that additional height will count tower floor area. It's a loss from a development's perspective. It's like a one full floor of your precious real estate that is lost. But we don't want to say no, you can never have any mechanical that is taller than 25.
So it's only one floor that you lose, that's it?
No,
It's the FAR.
In this example, so this building has 132 feet mechanical space.
Yep.
So we divide that 132 by 25, which is 5.28.
Right.
So that means we round to the nearest integer. If more than 0.5 go up, less than go down. So in this case, it's round down to 5. And it basically means 5 floors of floor area. So if you have like a 40% low coverage tower, 0.4 FAR times 5, which is 2.0 FAR. So for 10 FAR building, 2 FAR loss is very significant. And we anticipate developers wouldn't really utilize that kind of technique. They may sometimes choose to lose one floor, but it's not likely that they are willing to lose 5 precious real estate.
So we would like them to lose 5 floors.
Sure, and they will. Well, yes, if they do, yes, but it's not likely they do it because they don't want to be punished that way.
Yeah.
So the next proposal is how we address the clustering of mechanical space. So in this example, 20-foot mechanical void, four of them clustered in a lower section of a building. So our regulation says if those floors are clustered within 75 feet from each other, then you have to combine those heights and then divide by 25. So if you have a 420-foot mechanical space, which is 80 feet, divided by 25, 3.2 rounded to 3. So they lose 3 floors of precious floor area. So basically those top 3 floors will be gone. The final component of our proposal is how we address the mechanical space in mixed-use buildings. So our proposal will always cover mechanical space associated with residential portion of a building. So when we say that, some designers could say, well, so if you're regulating only a residential mechanical space, I'm going to just have a one-story a commercial, and then have 150 feet mechanical for that commercial space. We don't want to see that kind of workaround. So we have after surveying a number of mixed-use buildings, we determined that if a mixed-use building contains less than 25% of commercial or community facility floor area, we will regulate mechanical space for that commercial or community facility, space.
I have to go out there soon.
So how we came up with this formula? One very significant example is this mixed-use, like a medical office and the residential development on the top in the Upper East Side, Mount Sinai Medical School. So it has several floors of medical research facility. And based on our experience, we know that those medical facilities require a lot of mechanical space because of their specific air controlling requirements. So when I saw this building for the first time, and when we figured out this red highlighted portion is actually mechanical space, we are like, okay, what is going on? Then after close investigation into all the construction permits, we figured out that the most of the mechanical space is actually serving this medical facility, and potentially, we don't know for sure, but other medical buildings on the same zoning lot. If you want to retrofit and upgrade existing facilities, you don't necessarily have space within the building. So when you do a new construction, you may just want to take advantage of that new space and expand or improve the mechanical needs for the surrounding on the same zoning lot. So we have determined that, okay, so that seems to be very rational use of mechanical space. So to summarize, this building contains very significant amount of non-residential floor area. This top 2/3 of the mechanical space that is serving this medical complex is not going to be covered by our regulations. The top 1/3 of the mechanical space that is serving the upper floor residential floors will be covered by our proposal. Okay, just to summarize, we will update our residential tower floor area provision to require mechanical space that is more than 25 feet to count tower zoning floor area. And we would impose a 75 feet clustering rule. So if mechanical spaces are located within 75 feet from each other, you need to add them up and divide by 25, and you lose your floor area according to the number you come up. For mixed-use buildings, when non-residential floor space occupies less than 25% of a building, then the same 25-foot within 75-foot rule will apply to non-residential mechanical space. So to summarize, we anticipate after our proposal, it's not likely that they utilize this kind of techniques. They can still do it, but they just lose this much of precious real estate. So we anticipate buildings would conform to our typical tower configurations. So where those regulations apply, it's basically our proposal is focused on residential context where these mechanical voids actually happened. So Lincoln Square is covered, and most of the Upper East Side tower districts are covered, and these north of Madison and other areas where those excessively large mechanical voids buildings identified are covered. It also covers a good portion of the southern part of south of Central Park area, and also, at the same time, I just want to go ahead and state this, but these central business districts like Midtown, Hudson Yards, and Lower Manhattan are specifically excluded from our phase 1 of our proposal. We're committed to push out our proposal by the end of the summer for these central business districts. The reason why we couldn't make these happen at the same time with our residential district proposal in phase 1 is that these special districts has very specific floor area, use, and height and setback requirements. So their context is very significantly different from residential context we are addressing. So due to difficult city's environmental quality review requirements, we just have to wait, spend more time to calibrate our proposal and seek our assessment to address issues in those high-density commercial central business districts. I think, yeah, this is the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Leila.
You surveyed 800 buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Out of these 800 buildings, can you tell us the average height of mechanical rooms?
Sure, yes. So the vast majority of residential buildings, well, let's say this. So out of the 800, around 700 are in like a medium density non-contextual districts. They basically have like 13 floors, 20 floors. That's like a typical range of buildings in there. They don't need to have like a multiple mechanical floors in the middle of the building. If they ever have a mechanical space in the middle of a building, that tend to be like 12, not much more than 15. And their mechanical space is typically located in the penthouse or in the cellar. But when we look into resilient construction typologies, it doesn't make sense to have those mechanical space in the below grade area, and we are encouraging buildings to have mechanical space above flat area. So we may see more buildings with mechanical space that is visible from street, but I don't necessarily think they will have like a 20 feet, 30 feet mechanical space in like a 13-story buildings. In high density district where around 100 buildings were identified, the typical range is still around the same, like a 12, 15, some 20, some double floor mechanical space, especially if your tower footprint is smaller. Typical maybe like a 12 feet, but the moment you have to have like a double floor because of small space or one floor of mechanical serving the commercial space below and another floor serving like a residential above, 12 times 2 is like very close to 25 feet. So there are like more than a handful of buildings having that kind of double mechanical floor configurations.
Didn't you just say?
Hold on, weren't you going to ask why Board 5 is not included? I'm going
to ask this question if I'm allowed.
Yeah, I want to know the answer
I
too.
would love the opportunity. Thank you. When you presented to the committee, you basically told us that there were 7 buildings that have mechanical voids, excessive mechanical voids.
Sure.
Is it correct to say that 4 of those are in CB5?
4 or 5, yes.
Okay, so we actually carry the brunt of this tremendously detrimental impact, and yet most of Community Board 5 is not included, especially, and I want to get that very, very clear, 57th Street, also known as Billionaires Row, also known as the location where these mega towers have been built, is not covered by your proposal.
I'm very happy to say this, but our proposal actually covers all of those buildings identified in our study.
Okay, so this is actually the red line is actually the boundaries of your proposal.
Yes.
Okay. As you can see, 57th Street is not covered.
Sure.
The block between 57 and 58 is covered on the north side. But the south side of the block, meaning the north side of 57th, is not covered.
Sure.
We actually have highlighted in pink those soft sites, and just so you know, closer to the park, it is the Park Lane Hotel. We know that this building is going to be redeveloped. Right across the street is a Turkish developer by the name of Sedesco. Next to it is the Rizzoli building that we fought so hard to preserve, and we lost such a tragic preservation battle. The little sliver on the same block is 7 West, belongs to Solo. He has indicated that he's going to redevelop. And across the street is another enormous site, also owned by Solo, that is getting primed for redevelopment 2 days after you introduced your amendment. 5 buildings were getting permitted for demolition on this little sliver of an area. You see why we're concerned?
Sure, yes.
Do you see
I do,
why we're
yes.
He's got it.
And
He's got it.
so to your first question about all the current or, you know, like a currently proposed or under construction buildings, like, you know, 111 West 57th or like a 217, like a Central Park Tower South. If you take a closer look at those towers, actually the towers are happening mostly in the, you know, the area we are, you know, addressing. At least more than half of the towers are always located in there. The reason why they are doing it is because Midtown has height controls which prevent towers to go higher than, you know, certain height. So they're just like a natural shifting into non-Midtown portion where tower restriction is so much looser. So by addressing, like implementing our proposal, you can't really replicate the Central Park South or the 111 West 57th towers. And you know, people ask, 432 Park Avenue, why that happened. It happens only if a site can be completely flattened. The moment you have larger, you know, landmark buildings in your zoning lot, then the height calculation goes really, you know, difficult for them to go much higher than a certain height. I don't say it's not going to be like, you know, 200 feet tall buildings, but going beyond 1,000 feet is very hard in these districts. And we already have a lot of, you know, buildings that are in, commercial buildings that are in the same range. And when we hear those soft sites are vulnerable to mechanical voids, we're committed to push out our proposal. It's delayed because of the difficult secret requirements and complex existing land use regulations in Midtown. But we are committed to address or push our proposal into a public review as early as summer. If they just file the permit, we're not specifically chasing a specific development. We never do that, and but it will be very difficult for them to finish their foundation before our summer proposal will be in place.
May you be correct.
Yes, it's unfortunate that I can't.
Very unfortunately, our experience in CD5 is that we have been right and DCP has been wrong. And I can give you a number of examples, including 432, including JP Morgan Chase that never made it into the assessment of East Midtown, including the Grand Hyatt. We can go on and on and on, including mega towers that we were told would not be an issue because there's no market for it, that it would self-regulate, that it is actually a preservation tool, and the reality is vastly different. We suffer.
We got it. We got it.
Thank you.
He answered your question? Okay.
How would you address
and excuse me, can you please identify yourself for the record because this is a public hearing?
Oh, sorry. My name is Mi-Fong Chung. I'm Chair of Land Use for Community Board 3. How would you address voids that are not characterized as mechanical voids? I know, for example, 111 57th Street has a roughly 100-foot tall, just empty volume of space, and the floor of that space is not mechanical. The floor of that space is technically considered residential, and they just put a ceiling above that floor at normal apartment height, but the ceiling is not a floor. They say you can't walk on it and occupy it, and that's how it was submitted. So all 100 feet plus above that residential floor is a void, not a mechanical void, but just a void. And there's nothing in the rules that
Okay, so
disallow that.
which specific development?
111.
157.
111.
111.
The one
Oh,
that's
so
mentioned
this
earlier.
one. Okay. Yes, we looked into this, and zoning has a definition of like a unused or inaccessible space. That's specifically count as a floor area, but only one floor today. So
you can still
our
have that void.
proposal is including that like an unused, unoccupiable space to be subject to our regulation. So if you have like 100 feet unused floor space, currently it's only count as one floor. But after our proposal, that will be subject to our 25 feet rule. So it will count as several
So
floors.
it's not just mechanical voids, it's all, it's mechanical and
Unused
unusable,
space.
uninhabitable.
I'm sorry, can I clarify that? Because I think there is a misunderstanding. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, my name is George Jaynes, I'm an urban planner. So if you had a residential floor and it had 100-foot ceilings without the drop ceiling, like let's say a lobby or some sort of amenity space, it would not be addressed by this.
That's correct. I was just
Okay.
talking about uninhabited.
Oh, okay, all right, thank you.
On a similar note, I'd like to ask why the proposed text includes the word enclosed.
And your name and address.
Sorry, thank you. Rachel Levy, I'm the director of Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. So I noticed in the text that there's specifically the word enclosed is included, which to our reading makes it sound as though this regulation will not apply to 249 East 62nd Street, which I know you've been concerned about. So I'd like to know why.
Yes, so we looked into like different types of like a space in a building, and it was really like difficult to determine what is like a excessive and not excessive when it comes to those like unoccupied space. When we look into like a City Corp tower in Midtown, which has probably like a 200 feet tall stilts and space under it, which is a plaza, which is serving the subway entrances and providing retail and all the amenity space for the the general public. So, if a development serves a purpose and contribute to the general like a welfare of general public, we don't want to say you can not do it. And the case of 249 East 62nd Street, we are in process of getting in touch with the building department and see what is the actual proposed building. But my understanding is that the 62nd Street building doesn't have a construction permit. They only have foundation permit, but they can do the foundation, but they can't build it because they don't have the permit. And the zoning ZD1 diagram shows enclosed space. And my understanding is that they can't build a building that is not consistent with the zoning drawing on the website. So if they ever have to, or want to move on with the speculated stilts design configuration, they have to modify the zoning examination drawing, and they have to go through the a number of review procedure. So it's really hard to say what the actual implications for that particular development. But we are certainly looking into the other types of mechanical space. Like we have been looking into, and we will continue looking into concurrently with as we develop the Central Business District Tax Amendment proposal.
My name is George James. I'm a planner working with Rachel on this. So your answer to the last question was a little bit legalistic, I think, because the ZD1 for 62nd Street, there's an intent to revoke on that, and the DOB is requiring a new one, right? They've already said that they need to have a new one. They just haven't filed it yet. And DOB has said that that space is outdoor space, right? And they've said that in the press. They have not confirmed that, but there is evidence in the Schedule A's that they are planning an outdoor space there. I think what was really important about what you said, though, and what I think we all need to take away about what you said is that you are going to be looking for when you amend or when you do the follow-up action in the summer to maybe address those issues. And I think what's incumbent upon the people here and the borough president is to say, well, yeah, you actually got to do a follow-up action that addresses the unenclosed voids as well as the enclosed voids, because it's just another loophole, right? It's something that if you close one loophole and leave another one open, people will just use the other one. And and clearly it seems like that's what's going to happen on 62nd Street. And so I hope Department of City Planning, while you've made the commitment to expand geographically, which I think is really important, I think you also need to look at expanding the text to cover more areas.
We are rigorously looking into other types of void, and we will determine if that space actually can happen, and if so, then we will figure out what we could do with it.
Excellent.
Hi, Sean Corsendi for Landmark West. Nabila Malik and Stephen Johnson presented to CB7 last night, and they talked about the 12-foot. Someone asked why, or the 25-foot. Someone asked why is it 25? And the answer was this gives flexibility, that the majority of everything they saw was 12 feet. You just said the same thing except for a handful of buildings, and those handful of buildings have a huge impact on the city. So why is the rule being set to 10 or 12 buildings citywide, rather than the majority of these 900 or 785 buildings that you looked at that complied with the other? That's question one. But question two is, everybody's focusing on this 25 feet. I'm more concerned with the 75 foot, where every time you take a break, a bite, you get some snack on the side. So 75 feet, it's not all that much, right? We're talking about 7.5 pre-2012 floors, and we're looking at like 5 or that it would be of 10-foot floors, right? So that's 7.5. Even if you made that 200 feet, which is more logical, right? Because a 20-story building might have mechanicals on the roof. Under the current metrics of a 16-foot, 5-inch floor to floor, we're talking 12 stories. So every 12 stories, you still get a freebie. It's still overly generous. And this is a floor that you can feed up and down from one. It's not just that systems work in one direction. So can you explain where this ridiculous 75-foot spacing came from?
Sure.
It's a completely
yes.
arbitrary number.
Thank you for making that point. And we definitely did look into what the rational height threshold for that clustering rule. As part of the survey, we identified like a city's own HPD project in East Harlem, and when we looked into that, city-sponsored, nearly 100% affordable construction, had to have a mechanical floor that is within 9 stories from each other. So that is a city-sponsored proposal, and we know that they are not abusing mechanical space to increase the market value. And when we still see a mechanical floors that is within 90 feet from each other. So we just had, looked into it. There may be a number of factors that is affecting the specific, mechanical space typology for that building, but we couldn't really say that typology can never happen going forward. So we know that mechanical space want to be closer to the unit it's serving. If you have to have a 200 feet long pipe that is, serving, residential units, you have to wait for like 10 minutes before hot water comes down to your unit. And we don't want to preclude a potential of having evenly distributed mechanical space that is closer to the unit they are serving. And that's the reason why we came up with this 75-foot rule.
Well, I'm hearing you say 90 foot, but I still don't see how 90 became 75. Can you just Pac-Man that for me?
Okay, so that's a good question. But so one building happened to be 90 feet, and is it reasonable, not unreasonable for a building to want to have a mechanical space that is like a 6 stories up? Like we have a lot of like 6-story buildings, and we don't want to overly regulate to preclude the potential design configuration that enhance our sustainability goals.
But I still don't know how 90 became 75 if your precedent is 90. Like, what was for sustainability, we're having more open space?
Well, so I would say, like one example, 90 feet, so therefore it should be 90 feet, doesn't necessarily feel, very comfortable for us. But thank you so much for your comment, and we will definitely look in, every single community board I have visited so far have asked to look into that 75-foot rule, and we are definitely paying attention to it, and we will think of a way to calibrate that number.
Jen Constantine, Save Central Park, NYC. Did DCP take into account fire department access when setting the 25-foot mechanical void? Because we're very concerned about safety issues, and we don't feel that they've been taken into account enough.
We have been talking to the fire department, and we do share the same concern of fire safety and the safety of firefighters, and I don't want them to be unnecessarily serving a space that is unnecessarily difficult to serve. And however, fire department has their own measurement and ways to address issues that goes beyond the purview of a zoning, and they're currently working on revising the building code, I believe, and our proposal is really addressing building, and based on what we have talked to them over time, our proposal is not making their service difficult, but easier.
I'm Holly Rothkopf with Safe Central Park, NYC. We support the idea of regulating voids and the space between them. We are having trouble grasping how the standard should be the atypical building rather than the 12-foot void and the 200-foot space between them.
Okay. I see. Yes. Well, that's like the vast majority, but we saw a handful or a couple of examples which required mechanical space to be closer than that, like a typical, like a 15-story range we looked into, and we don't really want to say you can never build that like a good building going forward.
But could they still build it? It would just count towards FAR?
Sure. Yes, they can still build it, but they will count our floor area, and but our we have two goals, like addressing mechanical voids, providing as much as possible, as many affordable units as possible, or housing unit in general as possible, and we punishing our own city-sponsored affordable construction to address void. It will take a little more consideration.
I'm Peg Green from the New York Landmarks Conservancy.
Since the fire department issue was raised, voids exist in commercial buildings that presumably would still make it difficult to fight a fire. So why isn't this addressing voids in commercial buildings?
Sure. So we like concurrently with like a residential void study, we did look into commercial buildings, and what we can safely say is that non-residential mechanical space varies so significantly. When we look into residential mechanical space, there are like a typical like a standard we felt comfortable setting. When it comes to commercial non-residential space, there's no such thing as standard for that. And if you just walk out a few blocks and go to the like a World Trade Center, the first so many stories in those complexes are actually mechanical space. The reason I'm speculating is that it's sitting on water, like it's a flat plane, and it has massive below surface space, like a commercial space, and it doesn't make sense to have those like a mechanical units in the below grade. They chose to raise that space above ground level. I think that's why World Trade Center complex has so many mechanical space that is visible, rather than below grade cellar mechanical space we typically see. And at the same time, the size of those commercial space tend to be much bigger than residential floor area. Residential development has 12 FAR cap, state cap. It's not going to be much as big as World Trade Center, for instance. But in Midtown, Hudson Yards, and other areas, commercial FAR can go up to like 30 FAR. So when we want to regulate mechanical space for 30 FAR building versus like 4 FAR buildings, they seem to have very different standards, or at least like a need for mechanical space. And we couldn't really have a conclusion on how we can possibly effectively regulate mechanical space in commercial buildings.
I find that hard to accept.
Yeah,
agreed.
Roberta?
In the late 60s or 70s, there was a huge fire in I don't remember all the details, in a huge commercial building in Midtown, and a whole bunch of people died. And after that time, the fire department started having fire marshals in businesses in high-rise buildings. It blows my mind that, this could be such a devastating fire in a commercial building.
I'm sorry, do you want a response to that, or
Well, no, I'm
just making a statement?
I'm incredulous that it's
Layla?
not being
Just
considered.
to carry on Peg's comment, I think the concern that we have is not about mechanical space. Filled mechanical space, I think we don't have an issue with.
Right.
We're not afraid of a compressor. We have an issue with voids, and I think that the concern, whether it's for residential or commercial buildings, is that voids should not be used. That these areas should be actually filled and maximized,
Right.
so that they're not, unnecessarily used to, purposes that have nothing to do with the efficiency of the mechanical units or whatever it is that is on these floors. Whether they're mechanical or structural or open space. But I think that, and this is, from what I understand, it is really the spirit of the amendment, which I think has lots of fabulous parts to it. I love the clustering metrics, it's great. But I think that, what you identified is that, some developers are using hollow space.
Yes.
And this is not okay. And I think that, I think we appreciate that the norm for mechanical, for commercial buildings is vastly different. From a hospital to an office building that deals with tech to, other types of commercial buildings, the needs are going to be different. They transport many more people, you need many more banks of elevators. We totally appreciate that. But these areas need to be filled with mechanical stuff rather than left void. And I think that this is the concern that, a number of people around this table share.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Lo Vandervalk. I represent Carnegie Hill Neighbors. I have two detailed questions, and then I'll have a comment, if I may. Below 25 feet, what's the rounding rule then? What would it be? What would the FAR penalty or be for 22 feet, for example?
So if your mechanical space is below 25, which falls under our typical mechanical space range, we do not have any penalty for that space.
So it's all 0 until you get to 25,
Yes.
FAR 0 until 25, okay. Then my second question is, what happens above 25? For example, let's say 37 feet.
37
If you round that, it's below 1.5.
That is 1.
That counts as 1, okay. So if you're seeking, now I'm going to make my comment, okay. If you're seeking to maximize void spaces, then you would shoot for the 37.5, just below, say 37.49. You don't want to go above, because then you shoot to 2 FAR. So that gives you about 37 feet for which you pay a penalty of 1 FAR. You can then space these 75 feet apart, and you're going to you're going to be able to raise the height of the building this way without incurring as great a penalty as you are able to give. Because my suggestion, okay, to answer my own question, why not round to, say, 1 decimal instead of rounding to 1 integer? If you round to 1 decimal, then 37 feet gets a penalty of 1.4 something. At least at least that is within the spirit of what you're trying to do. I'm not trying to, in this question, I'm not trying to change your framework, but I'm trying to tighten it.
I see. Yes, that sounds very rational, and we will see if that is possible to make that possible as part of this proposal. But I believe that the moment you have to count 1 additional floor, again, if you recall my diagrams, you're losing the top most precious penthouse in the building. So I hope, well, not hope, but we believe that our mechanism of 1 entire loss of a floor is very strongly incentive for them.
Could I may have a misunderstanding on the rounding. Would 50 feet be 2?
50 feet will be 2, yes.
Wouldn't?
Yeah.
But if it's 49.999, it's a 1.
Well,
yeah, is that
whole number, like a
you round up
50.1 inch, another floor. If 50, then 2 floors.
No, my understanding is that you round to lower if it's
okay,
below 0.5
I'm sorry.
upper
Yes,
if it's-
you may well be correct. Yes.
after the 25. At 25, anything below 25 is 0. But after that, you round to the nearest.
Yes, like if 50
integer.
divided by 2. No, 50 divided by 25 is 2.0. So rounding to 2.0 seems to make sense.
Yes, but to answer Sean's dilemma, if it was 45, it would still be 2 because you would round up.
No,
it counts 1 FAR.
No, 45.
No,
then
45.
2.
45 would still be 2.
Yes.
Oh, 44.
So you don't get the 25 free anymore.
Once you exceed 37.5,
yes,
then you're
Two.
above 0.5. Oh,
So you're
you know,
at 2.
So you're already at 38, you're at 2, according to your.
Yes.
So you try to stay below that. You try to get 1, and so 37.49 will keep you at 1.
Well-
and then you distribute these throughout the building, and you are able to raise the height of that building substantially.
They will really have to really think about this very carefully.
Yeah.
Again, if you do multiple of those 37.5 floors, they basically lose several floors of top most precious floors.
Yeah, but they're creating additional height so that the floors remaining will be higher and more valuable.
Sure, I understand and I appreciate the comment, and we will think about it.
Can I just comment on this word shades? I just comment on what you're, I think it's very unlikely a developer would do that. Instead, what they would do is they would create the 24.5 foot void, and then they would make an amenity space, or they would increase the floor to floor heights, or they would do something else to use that floor area productively.
Oh, but you're also saying if you stay below 25, then it's free.
Well, yes, that's
So
right.
you have 25 distributed throughout the building.
Right. So
That's how you. I agree. That's because of the rounding rules.
Yeah,
You see.
well, right, so you would have 25 and then 75 and then 25 and then 75.
Yeah.
That would be, I think, the
Yeah.
strategy you would do. And if you wanted it higher, then you would have a lobby that's 50 feet, or, you would have some sort of
Which is still
amenity space,
possible.
or 16 or 18 foot floor to floor heights with the apartments. So, I mean, make no mistake, that this solution is narrow, right? And I think it's very fairly criticized as being very narrow to address one issue. And I think, again, as I said before, I think it's for the advocates, for the borough president's office, is to continue to push this in the follow-up action to broaden this as much as possible.
And pardon me if you addressed this and I just didn't hear, but city planning wants to come back and expand the area that this covers. Is it going to be citywide, or are you still picking places?
So all the district, like a central business district, special district that has special, bulk and use regulations, that will be our phase 2. So in other part of the city, towers are not permitted, and we really do not think there are any potential abuse of mechanical space.
Layla, and then.
So going forward, when you actually introduced this zoning text amendment, you did a EAS, and as a result, there was no scoping period. So can you actually explain to us what is the scope? And in our advocacy going forward, we want to know where we stand on that. Is the map and any change to the map, would that be considered within scope or not? And the metrics and those specific numbers, the 25 and 75, are those considered as strictly the scope, or is there any change to that would still be in scope?
So I think I can safely say that the expanding the geography isn't necessarily in scope, because we didn't look into the area you're requesting to expand, and the EAS didn't analyze those spaces or areas. In terms of a number configurations, I have to bring this back to our our scope experts. So I do not have a definite answer to those.
What about the word enclosed? Would that be within scope?
I'm not 100% sure, but I have a feeling that we can only address what we said we will address in the proposal.
Holly?
Yeah, Holly with Safe Central Park. You said, I liked what George said about phase 2, but it sounds like you're saying phase 2 will not cover any additional loopholes. It will just cover a bigger geographic area and business district?
Well, what I can say for sure is that we will definitely expand the geography. if and how we can address those like different types of spaces is we're still looking into it, and we don't have like a definite answer.
Deputy Borough President Alger Bonilla, followed by Mayfong.
I just want to echo. I just want to echo some of the aspects that make this really worrisome, given the narrow mediation presented here. I think you know, I'm still not understanding the rationale where, you know, the peer comparisons are at 12, and you settle on 25. And then the other peer comparisons in terms of the intervening floors is at 90, and yet you're at 75. Given the issues of amenities and lobbies and other things, it's really not dealing, I think, with the concerns that we hear from constituents and the residents in terms of like the super, you know, tall height of this and just the abuse of the voids. I really don't understand the rationale of from 12 to 25 and from 90 down to 75. Seems like you keep erring on the side that's incentivizing the abuse.
We are definitely not incentivizing the use of mechanical space, but today we seem to have no control. Tomorrow we will have a control, and we will, you know, look into like a larger control. And we are like start receiving all the comments from the community boards, and they seem to have like a consistent like request in it, and we will definitely look into it and address it as possible and necessary.
Because you do have the controls in two, if I'm not mistaken, two of the levers that you have, two of the places where you can make a difference are in those two numbers of the 25 and the 90. Well, the 12 and the 90, if you wanted to address this in a more appropriate way.
Thank you. I will definitely bring your comment back to the team, and we will take a closer, more like a focused look on those issues.
Nathan?
A few things. So as an architect who's designed probably up to like 100 multifamily residential buildings in this city, I can kind of, and if I may try to help you out a bit, I can see an argument for the 75 feet based on simply most of the zoning, many of the zoning restrictions require a street wall of 65 to 85 feet. And that's, when you have that setback, that's a very common and logical place to put a mechanical floor. So in that zone, you have the mechanical in the basements, and then you have your mechanical between the tower and the base at the next kind of reasonable step. So I see an argument for 75 feet at that location in the building. I still worry, especially in the super talls, the 75 feet is really quite low for the next mechanical floor. Typically, before developers started kind of really egregiously using this as a loophole, most developers didn't want to have a lot of mechanical floors, and actually it was always a fight during the design process. The mechanical engineers wanted more mechanical floors, higher floors, and usually the developers didn't want the mechanical floors. But I don't know if this overcomplicates the rule maybe, but to me, the 75 feet maybe only makes sense in that context, between the base and the tower. And the rest of the tower shaft, I think 75 is too small of a distance. In regards to the 12 feet versus 25 feet, 12 feet is very commonly seen because that is the maximum height you can have a straight run stair without having a switchback. And so if a typical residential floor was 10 feet or 11 feet, the developers usually wouldn't let us do higher than 12 feet because they didn't want to add a landing to the stair and grow the stair footprint. So that's probably more why you see 12 so much, and not so much for any mechanical driven needs. In fact, mechanical engineers will always push for more height. But given that, 12 is very common for mid-rise buildings. And mid-rise, I'm thinking of like, between 12 and 30 stories. But once you get into the really tall towers, your mechanical needs are actually increased. And if you don't have enough height and you need to place a cooling towers are often like 16 feet high, and then they need some empty air, free air above and around the equipment. So I can see an argument for the 25. I think if you could better explain that, you might have a less resistance to, even though most commonly it's 12, we're allowing them 25. There are cases where 25 is needed, and I think especially in very tall buildings or very large buildings. However, to add upon what George James was saying earlier, I think you really should consider in a residential building deploying the 25-foot maximum even for habitable spaces. In a commercial space or a public space, I would hate to see limitations on ceiling heights and having the flexibility to do more than 25 feet is absolutely vital in commercial spaces and gathering spaces. But in a residential building, even if you're looking at, say, the amenities, a private amenity, anything beyond 25 feet is really kind of excessive for a private, essentially a private use. And we're really only seeing that in luxury buildings. And I think it's very anti-urban to encourage all these private amenities when developers really should be, instead of maximizing all these over-the-top luxury private amenities at the expense of the accessibility and the patronage to public pools and gyms and movie theaters and climbing gyms and all these ridiculous bowling alleys and things. Like, it's just really too much. So like 25 feet is plenty, even for habitable spaces and private apartments as well. And that's more than a double height space. So, not that we're seeing a lot of that tall of ceiling heights within the residential amenities. I think there needs to be some kind of control in terms of just to cut back on this excessive, really anti-urban, anti-community sort of design. And it would fall naturally under the 25-foot rule. In fact, I would even consider making it less than 25 for residential habitable spaces, except maybe for the exception of ground floor lobbies or spaces that tend to be more public.
Okay, thank you so much. I gained a lot of meaningful information from your speech.
I'm Gail Brewer, and I am the borough president, and I approve that message.
Thank you. We take this very seriously.
Is there any more questions or comments? So I'd like to add something, and Mei Feng, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to talk about process, and part of DCP's timeline has made it impossible for CB3 to bring this issue of the text amendment to the full board and have a vote. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, we didn't get notification until after we'd already posted our public agenda. So we won't be able to hear it, well, we weren't able to hear it last night at the land use committee. So, we had to have an emergency addition of this agenda item on our executive committee, and unfortunately, it's not comprised of many of the people who have more technical knowledge and experience to be able to comment on it.
Okay, I'm really sorry about that, like a timing issue, and we will definitely take that into account going forward.
And I just want you to take that back to the people at city planning, and I know this isn't your purview, but ever since this administration, we've had this problem, application after application after application, where we used to have notice, we didn't necessarily agree with the last administration on a lot of things, but we were at least informed in a timely manner so that we could do our jobs. And, not to be able to post the hearing publicly, really just, we literally can't do our jobs.
Okay, thank you so much. We will definitely talk to our land use review team and improve all the communication issue.
Thank you.
Any other questions or statements? Yes.
Yes, further to your, I'm sorry, I don't have your name.
Mifan.
Mifan, okay. you talked about the 25-foot height, and it seemed to be in the context of floors, rather than what we've been talking about, it seems to me, the 25 feet in terms of voids. So is there a meaningful distinction between the floor heights and the void heights? I think you were saying 25 feet is excessive for floors. I can imagine that the floors could well be lower than 25, but that the voids would be would take advantage of the 25-foot allowance that you seem to be encouraging. So I just wanted to know if there was a distinction in city planning in offering these proposals between floors and voids.
You're talking about mechanical floors, or
no,
like
residential floors. I think you were
floors.
mentioning 25 feet also in the context of residential
Yes,
floors and their
these are
adequacy.
habitable floors.
Habitable floors. So I just want to make sure that we're not mixing these two issues. For
What
my
I was
own,
proposing is they extend that limitation not just on mechanical voids and mechanical floors that have a ceiling higher than 25, but also habitable floors that currently count as floor area that are, that right now can be more than 25 without any FAR penalty.
I see. So would there be if for habitable floors, are you going to penalize those?
that is not part of our proposal.
Okay.
Build another.
Okay.
We're advocating that it be included though. I mean, as an example.
Oh, okay. But 25 feet is a lot of floors at 25 feet is hard to imagine so far. I mean, we have them at 16 feet and they're horrible, but 25 is yeah. Maybe that should be lowered.
I just wanted to clarify what the borough president or the council could change in this. How much leeway do they have to make changes? Is it just on the numbers?
So in time, I believe that city planning commission has their own potential modifications within scope. And city council, we will definitely take a closer look at all the comments from the community boards and borough presidents and all the public comments, and we will adjust our proposal as within the scope.
Right, but once it gets to the council, what power does the council have?
Council also has power to modify our proposal within scope. And in terms of details of scoping, it's a harder concept for me to grasp. So I need to get back to our lawyers in the office.
I know Leila asked about it, but will you consider publishing that scope in time for people to comment on it?
So typically, our land use application and secret documents contain the scope within those documents. So modifications can be made, based on that, scoping determinations.
It's available.
Oh, it is? Okay, sorry.
This is a comment. My comment is that just regarding the fact that we're here today. Shortly in 2017, the Board of Standards of Appeals said that East 30th Street, one of the examples you show here, was legal with this huge void, and they said it wasn't a problem, right? They said, there's no problem here, please go away. And, Ben Kalos helped us get a meeting with Department of City Planning the next month. You sat down with us, you listened to us, you accepted that there was a problem. I mean, you understood that there was a problem. The Department of City Planning understood that there was a problem at the first meeting. At that meeting, we gave you the first, your first viewing of 2409 East 62nd Street, and bang, it was oh, we haven't seen that. Oh, that's a problem. And the fact that, from October of 2017, we have a completed application, 14 months later, something like that. That's pretty awesome. right? And I've complained terribly about the limitation of this, right? I wish it was broader, but the fact that it went from, yeah, this is not a problem, to we have a text amendment on the table in 14 months.
Is he saying something good?
Yeah, I am. I'm saying something good.
Wow.
It's like, and I'm
waiting for the punchline.
I want to see more of it. I want to see more of it, right? You know, this is how
This is
government's
planning.
supposed to work.
This is
You know,
real
it's
planning.
being responsive to a problem.
Thank you.
I do thank you so
This
much.
clip is available.
I should have recorded and.
It is recorded.
No,
It's
but-
recorded.
But you
It
know,
is recorded.
we want more too.
And
so-
then we'll say, but you need to give community boards the opportunity to bring this to their full boards and vote on it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Which
absolutely
has
something.
not happened.
So anyway, I just wanted to I wanted to say that for the record. You know, this was responsive, and that's awesome. And there needs to be more of it because we don't see it often enough.
Thank you so much.
Any more comments, questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very
very much.
Thank you. So I think we are done. If there is a motion to adjourn,
I move we adjourn.
thank you. Second?
Can we leave statements
Second.
with you?
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
second.
Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Want to discuss this any longer? No? Okay, this meeting is formally adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, you're amazing.